And we are back. It is time for another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. We're going to late start today, Ryan. So I want to dive right into this thing. We have a matchup today. We're going to continue to talk a little bit more at the end of the show about the big event we have coming up on Saturday. That I want all of y'all that are going to be in town for that game. If you live in town or going to be in town, you're going to want to be at that. It's going to be around 3:30 on Saturday. It's going to be a lot of fun. I promise you, you're going to want to be there for that. We'll talk more about that at the end, Ryan. But I just want to talk Notre Dame Stanford right now. Okay, so I've been waiting an hour to do this. I want to dive into the statistical matchup because I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this matchup from both sides, about how it's an intriguing matchup, how Notre Dame is perceived right now, and how Stanford is perceived right now, how they stack up, and just a really intriguing matchup because it's one of those games, Ryan, where we're going to learn a lot about Notre Dame. Do I expect them to beat Stanford? Yeah. Would I be shocked if Stanford won this game? Absolutely. It's not so much about that. It's about, can you dominate the way you're supposed to dominate, which means building on what you've done the last 3 weeks. That's going to be the big part of this, and being able to thrive in the areas where you have the matchup advantage and then eliminate the areas where maybe you don't is going to be a big key to say how much growth has this football team showed.
Yeah. Brian, I mean, we talk about get right games all the time, right? Like for me, this is a get righter game, right? Like Notre Dame has been trending.
A jump game.
Yeah, it really is. Game. I mean, it's something where like, hey, Notre Dame has been trending pretty good the last couple games, especially offensively. Now let's make sure that that's not a little bit of a fluke, right? Like let's hit that and then take it to an even higher level. So we'll call it get righter. We'll call it whatever we want. This is a big opportunity for Notre Dame to ride momentum, but then take that momentum to a level up, right? Like this is a level up opportunity, I think, for Notre Dame. So I agree with you. I think that this is a massive opportunity. We're going to hyper-focus on the offense, of course, from a fan base perspective, because that's what has been kind of surged in the last couple of weeks. But the team as a whole has an opportunity to really kind of hit a different level this weekend. So it should be an exciting game.
I feel like with some people, they just can't enjoy a good thing, right?
Yep.
Or even enjoy a thing that was good but can be better. And so when you look at it, it's kind of funny. It's like now this week on our board and with my friends that are calling, because Notre Dame's had 2 pretty good games in a row offensively, not perfect, but much better, especially relative to what they've been. And when you think about it's going to be by Saturday, Ryan, we're talking about it being October 15th. It's going to be almost a month since Notre Dame has played a home game.
Yep.
Last home game was September 17th against Cal, and to think how far what they looked like last time they were home, against a Pac-12 opponent, right, from the Bay Area. And so then you look at it and you say, offense is getting better. So now there's this reaction of the defense that I think is a little bit like, whoa, okay, timeout. We've lost sight of the areas that need to improve, and now we're jumping into territory that's not where it is. And so it is interesting, but the reason behind that is, right, so I'm going to push back against some of that stuff. But here's why this game is important, because Notre Dame has yet to put a game together where both units kind of really thrive for the majority of the game. The defense played great for 2.5 quarters against North Carolina. They built up a big lead. That was the closest we've seen to this team playing a complete game. And then, of course, they let Carolina in late. Then the offense fumbles into the end zone. They miss a 4th and 1 in the second half with multiple chances to just make that a 60-something to 17 game, right? So, that's kind of what we're complaining about, right? Like they only beat 5-1 North Carolina on the road by 13 and let them get back in the game. Not even get back in the game late. Let them get a garbage touchdown to turn a 3-touch score game into a 2-score game, right? With a minute left. Yeah. So, it's things but I'm actually okay with that from fans. Like I'm actually, as I thought, I'm okay with it because I'm glad fans aren't just, again, what was always the criticism of Brian Kelly? Stop lowering the standard. Right. And so we're going to still hold the same standard, but then just understand what the process is to get there and what are the areas that they are there, what are the areas where maybe they're not there, and then how does that relate to the Stanford game? Because I think when you look at Ryan, you and I have watched a lot of film last few days, and this is a team that you need to be able to go out and say, whew, this is the kind of game where if your team is ascending, and I wouldn't say it was a fluke. I don't know if that's not the word I would use if the last 2 games were a fluke, because they weren't. You beat 2 really good teams in a row, but more of you have to avoid the step back. That's really the way I look at it. And I think we're kind of saying the same thing there. You can't take a step back. You've had this. You've ascended. You beat a quality Cal team in an ugly win. You had a really convincing win over North Carolina. You were convincingly better than BYU outside of about a quarter. I mean, if we're being honest, like middle of the second quarter, the middle or third quarter, the middle of the fourth quarter is about the only time BYU was even competitive in that game, really.
Yep.
And say, okay, but stop that, right? Stop those periods, right? Like, and this is the now against Carolina and BYU, it's a little tougher because those are better teams. Those are good football teams. Stanford's not. And so now is when we really see, okay, are they able to separate themselves from the Cows and the Marshalls, which is where they weren't in September? They let inferior opponents hang around. Have they grown to the point now where it's like, okay, we respect you. You're a rival. You have some things that give us problems, but sorry, we have a plan for that, and we're going to dominate you the way that we're supposed to. And I think as we dive into the on-paper matchup, it's going to be a little bit misleading, in my opinion, of what the gap is between those two teams, which we'll discuss as to why that gap exists.
Brian, I have a imperfect metaphor. You like metaphors? Would you like to hear this one?
Love them.
All right,
let's do it.
So think back to when you were a young kid, when you went sledding.
That's a long time ago for me.
I wasn't that. You're young and hip still. So think back to when you were sledding as a kid and you're running up the hill, right, Brian? You went down the hill. Now you're running back up to go back down again. And there's that point where you get up to a certain point where you can slide back down because it's not great footing, it's snowy, or you make it up to the peak, right? This development can be a slippery slope at times. Right. And I think that's the fight that you're working with here. And I know that was a really corny, weird metaphor for
well, no, because like when would you fall? Because I mean, I'm from Ohio, you're from Jersey. So we both sled as kids, right? We're both Northern kids at heart. You know, we would go on the reservoir because it was the highest hill and you could get really good sledding and, you know, and it was a lot of fun. But if you went up the hill too fast, you could fall back down. So it was like, hey, look, be steady, be firm, make sure you've got one foot in front of the other before you take that second step. And how do you learn that? By falling, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that right? Like, okay, I don't want to fall like I did last time because normally you and what do? Face plant in the snow and then you fall back down. Your sled's over here. You learn, hey, I got to make sure I put one foot in front of the other, right? To make sure that I don't take steps back. Well, I like the metaphor. I dig that.
You get some snow in the face, you scrape up your knee. Things happen, man. But
but you learn, okay, I may do it better next time. And that's kind of what the Ohio State and Marshall games were. It was like, you know what? You got a little ahead of yourselves and you fell back down. You know what I mean? You got knocked back down the hill, but now you're climbing up and you got to make sure that you don't, get impatient and try to get ahead of yourselves. Don't focus on Syracuse or Clemson or whatever. Just focus on that next step right in front of you. That step is Stanford.
And as we talked about on Monday in the Recruiting Hour show, Brian, it's also a very important recruiting weekend, again, for Notre Dame being at home with Jeremiah Love on campus, with Brandon Hillman on campus, with Ryan Wingo being on campus. Very important weekend.
A lot, or not all the commits, a lot of commits going to be on campus this weekend.
Yep. Christian Gray and all those boys. Yep. It's a very important weekend. And the last home game that I was at was Marshall, and that left a bad taste in your mouth, right? I know that's not the last home game, but you want to have a big
Cal wasn't that much better. I mean,
true.
It was 24-17. You were losing at halftime, but you got the win. But they're not the same team now, and they got to make sure that they don't revert back to that, and that's what this is all about.
100%.
So, Ryan, let's begin with a breakdown of the Notre Dame offense and against the Stanford defense, because I think this is really an intriguing matchup. And when you look at this matchup last year, Ryan, it was a Notre Dame got off to a slow start, which has kind of been a theme for Notre Dame the last couple seasons. I think there were times in 2021 where I felt like Notre Dame did a good job of coming out fast, but they were very inconsistent with it. And then this year, Notre Dame has 6 points in the first half on the season. And it was really the first game and the most recent game. They got a pair of field goals. So they scored three points against Ohio State on the first drive, 3 points against BYU on the first drive, and that's it. Last year was also, the first quarter was also, again, they came out well against Florida State and a couple other teams, but last year the lowest scoring quarters for Notre Dame were the first and the third. That's a sign of you're not getting fast starts out of the gate, and you have to get fast starts out of the gate. And I think that's something that, when you look at like the better teams, Ryan, they tend to be better out of the gate, right? And I think that's a big, this is the game where that has to happen. And even last year's game against Stanford, Ryan, it was one of those ones where Notre Dame had a chance. They really were rolling first half. It was 24-0 in the first half, but Notre Dame only scored a touchdown in the first quarter. And so it's kind of like, hey, look, you've got to be able to come out and you've got to be able to start fast, right? You got a touchdown on drive one, then a punt, then a touchdown, and then then a field goal, then a touchdown, then a punt. So even then, like 24 points was more about Stanford's deep offense went 3 and out, 4 and out, 3 and out, 2 and out and a fumble, 3 and out, 7 plays and a punt, and then a turnover on downs after one play, which means they took a knee. I mean, it was sheer dominance by the defense that kept giving you the ball back, and you weren't scoring at the level you need to. Notre Dame had, as I'm looking at this, Ryan, they had 6 possessions in the first half against Stanford last year, right? So you've got to come out and you've got to start fast. And I think this is a matchup that Notre Dame can and should be able to do that. And so that's going to be a big key for them this year, because for comparison's sake, this year, Ohio State, the quarter in which they've scored the most points, first and third.
Yep.
Now, the exception being against Notre Dame, because they scored a touchdown against Notre Dame, I think, in the first quarter. Mm-hmm. But every other game, they've started fast. You put teams away early, and that's the kind of killer instinct that you want to see from this football team. So when you look at the offense, that's the first thing that I want to see. And as we sort of dive into this matchup, Ryan, and we look at like the run offense and the pass offense and the total offense, Notre Dame's going to have an advantage in every matchup here. It's about, can you come out and execute at a high level? That's going to be a key. But this one right here is kind of where it starts. And like, as we said, Notre Dame's got some very strange statistics. And you're still at the point of the year, Ryan, where you ask yourself, okay, who is Notre Dame really? Mm-hmm. And I think this is one where you absolutely look at it and say, okay, we're going to learn a lot about it now, because when you look at Notre Dame and you look at their success on the ground the first 3 games, Notre Dame in the first 3 games of the season averaged 117.7 rushing yards per game. In 2 games, they've been able to go from, they were averaging 117.7 going into the North Carolina game. They've been able to jump that over 57 yards in 2 games. That is a big jump in 2 games, even this early in the season. In the last 2 games, Notre Dame has averaged against 2 teams that either were ranked, BYU, or are now ranked, North Carolina. They averaged 260.5 yards per game. Mm-hmm. And so this is a Stanford defense, as the numbers show, is not very good at stopping the run. And so this is a matchup, Ryan, where on paper it doesn't look like a huge mismatch. But if Notre Dame is the team they were the first 3 games, it's slight advantage Notre Dame. If Notre Dame is the team they've been the last 2 weeks, it's going to be huge advantage Notre Dame. And that goes to your point, Ryan. Don't take a step back. Yeah. This is a great for the rushing offense. This is a great building block opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and Brian, it's always, there's recency bias, right? But we can only judge this team based upon what they were the last time that we saw them on a football field, right? In the last 2 weeks, they've been a very good running team. And I was just about to say, even before you kind of highlighted it, like that yard per game rushing average on average performance is getting a lot more respectable than it was a couple weeks ago when we did this show, right? Like it's starting to look pretty good. It's getting there, man. It's climbing, right? So assuming that Notre Dame continues to have the exponential growth that we keep talking about, they continue to take it to that next step, then this is a massive advantage, right? Like it isn't an even advantage for me, because Stanford has pretty much been this team all the way from a run defense perspective, right? Like it's not like we've seen them start out terrible, get better, start out great, get worse. Like this is a team that has been just not a good run stopping team even last season. Like this is just what they've now become. So Notre Dame talked about starting fast, and I agree completely, because the other thing about Stanford is that Stanford has stayed in some football games this year for a while, and then like down the stretch of games, it's just like they fade, like then it's over at that point. So if Notre Dame gets a good start, first and foremost, you got to feel like you feel really good about the potential of the game, because Notre Dame has shown a proclivity to kind of, stay down the stretch a little bit. And I think that it starts right here, man. Right here.
what was one of the knocks on Brian Kelly for a time, and not just Brian Kelly. You go back to Charlie. I mean, there's been a lot of this isn't a pick on Brian Kelly day, but Notre Dame for a long time, it's that thought of they would play down to teams, right? And that's the thing. Late last year we didn't see that as much, which is good. But this is an opportunity. We're like, look, this is an inferior opponent, and we're talking strictly from the offense standpoint. This is an inferior opponent. It's your chance to go out there and have success. And I think when you talk about context, we're big into context, right? And I think that's a very important thing for understanding an opponent. And when you look at Stanford, Ryan, they gave up 159 yards to Colgate on the ground, 164 to USC, 169 to Washington, 351 to Oregon, and 192 to Oregon State. There's only been one really bad game among that. When you look at the teams they play, there's not a lot of good rushing teams on their schedule so far this year. They gave up 159 to Colgate. So far on the season, Colgate is only averaging 136.6, which means it got worse.
On the FCS level, too.
Correct, which means it got worse for them running the football after Stanford. And so they scored as many points against Stanford as they did against Holy Cross. I'm just going to point that out real quick. And Holy Cross went out there and rushed for 104 yards. Colgate rushed for 102 yards against Holy Cross. So, I mean, it just kind of, again, context. They held USC to 164 yards. USC's averaging 183 on the season. So that was a game where they held USC below their season average, which is a good performance. But part of that was they gave up 341 passing yards and 74.1 completion percentage, 12.6 yards per attempt and 4 touchdowns through the air.
Yep.
So it was one of those things where USC wasn't necessarily, looking to run the ball a whole lot and, averaged 4.7 yards per carry, which isn't great, but that's kind of on par, a little bit below where they've done. So that was decent job there. Okay.
Yep.
Washington, they held Washington to 169 yards, 5.3 yards per attempt, but Washington on the season is only averaging 142.2 and 4.3 per carry. So Washington had a full yard per carry higher and 27 yards more in that matchup. They gave up 351 to Oregon, who's the only team that they face that averages at least 190 rushing yards per game as of right now. Oregon averages 241.7 and 6.2 per carry. They went for 351 and 9.5 per carry against Stanford.
They're almost getting a first down every time they run the football. Like
right. And we just showed how Notre Dame statistically against BYU was very similar to where Oregon was, right? And so Oregon rushed for 212 yards and 4.8 yards per carry against BYU. Notre Dame went for 234 yards and 5.2 yards per carry against BYU. Mm-hmm. So both teams had success against the one common opponent. This kind of, again, context, right? Yep. And so I think that's a one where you look at and say, hey, that's an area where Notre Dame or Stanford really struggled, and Oregon had over 100 yards above their average, which when you're averaging 241 yards per game is impressive to go 100 over. And then they gave up 192 yards and 4.8 per carry to Oregon State, which is almost right where Oregon State is on the year. Oregon State's at 181 on the season and 4.85 per carry. So Oregon State pretty much met their mark, but Oregon State hadn't really been running the football all that well coming into that game. They were at 171 against Utah and 153 against USC, and really they've been solid but not great all season. So when you look at the context of it, Ryan, Stanford has allowed most teams they've played, all but USC, to go above their season rushing average. And they're teams that don't run the football very well, which makes this number right here look even worse when you consider that. They have only played really one good rushing team this season. And, that, like I said, Oregon's the only top 25 rushing offense they face. So on paper, even with Notre Dame's overall season numbers, Ryan, this is a big advantage for Notre Dame. And they need to carry it out, because what has been the offensive line's reason for success? I wouldn't necessarily say that they look like the 2017 unit. They're just blowing people off the ball. They're getting better movement, but it's been about there's more cohesion. They're playing as a unit better. They're getting to the second level. You made a comment to me when you were talking about Stanford's offensive line. You're like, dude, I don't know if I've seen them get to the second level yet when I'm breaking down their film. Well, that was Notre Dame in the first 2 games. Yeah. But we've seen them get, like late second quarter against Cal, we started to see more of that. We saw that against Carolina. We saw that against BYU, especially in the second half. So they're playing together more. Now the next step, Ryan, is be more dominant. I think that's the next step, and this is a team that I think you should be able to establish that, Ryan.
Well, I think that's where the big advantage is, right? Like offensive line to the defensive line and front seven, just in general for Stanford. I think that Notre Dame has a big advantage on paper, and especially what it's been the last 2.5 games, right? Because when you think about, I mean, folks, it wasn't too long ago that we were talking after the first couple games about how poor the offensive line looked, right? Like it was bad. But the last 2.5 football games starting to look good. Like you said, there's cohesion that's starting to build, right? Jared Patterson's really settling into the left guard position. Zeke Correll's playing good football.
That's the guy that's made the biggest jump from the first 2 games to now.
Agreed.
I mean, he was to the point where it's like they're going to have to consider maybe making a move.
Yeah. Like we were ready to call for Patterson to move back to center, right? Like we were ready for it.
Like let's give him another game, but he got better against Cal. Yep. He really took a jump against Carolina, but it's like, look, their defense stinks. Let's see, because the one thing about BYU is they didn't have a great rush defense, but up the middle they were pretty good.
Yeah.
And they had some big boys, and I thought Zeke more than held his own in that game. And so that's, to me, been the big key because, Ryan, you cannot run the football effectively on a consistent basis if you're getting beat up the middle. If your center's getting whipped, you can't do it. And it's not a surprise. It's not a shock or a coincidence at all that as Zeke has played better, the run game has gotten better. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence.
Especially with how Notre Dame runs their scheme, right? Like they'll run a little bit of outside zone and some jet and stuff. But, I mean, for the most part, they're running – inside zone, duo, power, like they're running inside-oriented runs. So, I mean, Zeke Correll, we need to give him credit. Like we gave Drew Pine a lot of credit yesterday on the show, right? We need to give Zeke Correll a lot of credit because it could have been easy for him to just duck his head, go into his shell and just be like, poor me. Like I'm just not, it's not going to happen for me, right? But he has fought back through adversity as the whole offensive line has. And we have seen growth from him. We've seen comfort from Jared Patterson. We've seen solid play the last 2 weeks from Josh Lugg. Nothing spectacular, but good enough. And we've started to see an evolution. I mean, Joe Alt throughout the majority of the season has played at an All-American level, for being honest, right? Like he's played very good football. And Blake Fisher has taken a big step over the last 2 games, excuse me. So now this is the opportunity for them to say, hey, we have now we're starting to stack football games every week now, right? Offensive line is playing a whole lot better. Now let's do it again and show that it's not a fluky thing. It's not a couple game then regression thing. And let's show that we can, at the end of the season, be one of the best, or middle of the season, be one of the best offensive lines in college football. I still don't think that's unreasonable to think at the end of the season. We can look back and say, when they got to their peak, when they made that ascension, they could argue for one of the best offensive lines in college football. They have that type of talent. They always have. They now are getting more confident, and you can see that confidence is now exuding out onto the football field. They are playing at a much higher level from an energy perspective and from a technical perspective and just from a comfort perspective right now.
I mean, I think they're already, if you just look at the last 2 weeks, they are looking like a top 10 unit. Their pass pro's been great. Their run game has been very good. As we mentioned, the last 2 games, what did I say that number was, Ryan? The last 2 games, like 287 against 260.5 in the last 2 games. Now, again, not great rush defenses, but you went way above and beyond what those teams are giving up. And that's kind of, that's kind of the point. I mean, yeah, those teams are not good on stopping the run, but, you had a level of success that really not many other people have had against them, right? And App State's the only team that's outrushed Notre Dame, and Notre Dame only got outrushed by App State because Notre Dame took 2 knees at the end of the game. So that they would have been above that as well, and on par with yards per carry. They had the most yards, I believe, against BYU. Yes, 234 is 22 yards more than they've given up all year. It was also, here's the difference between BYU and North Carolina. This was the most yards per attempt that BYU had given up. Because one thing we pointed out last week is BYU was making team work for yards. That you weren't having teams ripping off like 6 yards a carry, 5.5 yards per carry. They had not allowed a single team all year, including Oregon, to go for over 4 yards a carry. The most they'd allowed at that point in time was 4.82. Now, Notre Dame was around the mid 4-point mark most of the game, but they kept at it, and then were able to break some late. That's the mark of a good offensive line.
Yep.
This team is geared towards stopping your run. We didn't like the play calling. And the other thing, too, is the play calling wasn't good for the run game, or the play design wasn't good for the run game. And they still were able to move BYU around. And that, to me, is the mark of a unit that's coming along. So, yes. But again, Ryan, this is the point. Don't take a step back in this matchup. And Zeke continuing to do what he's been doing and just getting steady. Josh Lugg is who he is. He's not going to all of a sudden turn into a dominant player. He is who he is. Just don't regress. I thought he was very good in pass pro last week. He did his job in the run game. That's all I ask him to do. Just do that. Blake Fisher, to me, and Zeke Correll, to me, are the two guys with the most potential to ascend moving forward. They're going to be the keys to this offensive line, Ryan. From your point, is they're about a top 10 unit right now based on the last couple of weeks. Would you agree with that? In the conversation?
Absolutely.
Those two guys continuing to ascend is what could vault Notre Dame from 10 to top 5-ish, which is where they're going to need to be to have success in November. Yes. Because the best defensive line that you're going to face, if not the best in all of college football, is still on your docket less than a month from now. So that's why a game like this is important. Ascend against Stanford and then BYU and then Syracuse as you get ready for Clemson. So, and then the backs continue to do what you've been doing. Continue to stay patient. Continue to just don't make the mistakes. No fumbles. No, bouncing a ball outside that should have just hit hard up. I mean, take the 3 if that's what's there, and know when to bounce. Know when to do those type of things. I think the one thing that's got to get better this week compared to last week is the perimeter run blocking was very inconsistent last week, especially in the slot. Yeah. That scenario's got to get better, and the tight end blocking has got to still get better as well. So that's going to be a key part of this.
Just throw him down with Harry Heastand, man. Let him get going, right? I mean,
they are playing 2 freshmen now, right? And there are going to be some lumps. I mean, like, part of the reason the tight end blocking wasn't as good last week is because Eli Raridan had a rough game blocking. Well, that had been his strength. Freshmen are going to have inconsistencies. I mean, it's just part of life. I've never seen a freshman that didn't have a game where it's like, okay, he was doing well, but then he kind of took a step back. So you're going to have that. You're going to have some of those moments. That's the one position where a little inconsistency I'm going to be able to live with, just because your number 2 and your number 3 are true freshmen, and you own it. So I do expect that to get better. I don't think Eli Raridan is going to regress. Move. I mean, I think he's going to ascend and just a little step back, ascend, little step back. So I expect that to be a little bit better. And like Michael Mayer, it's just that he is who he is. I just don't see him getting better as a blocker. I think it's just who he is. I just want to be a little bit more consistent of what he does. Just get in their way a little bit more effectively, moving forward.
Yep.
Let's talk pass game, Ryan. This is another one where Notre Dame's numbers are very interesting, because if you look at their overall numbers, it's not good. It's bad, actually. The passing offense. Now, the number that I care most about in passing is the 2 numbers I care most about are yards per attempt and rating. And those are okay-ish, like mediocre, those 2 areas, but they're showing good potential. The yards per game can be misleading for a lot of different factors, but either way, there's no spin in this. The pass offense, from looking at it from an entire season, is not good. However, Ryan, if you just look at it from the context of the last 2 games, it tells you a little bit of a different story, and it tells you that this pass offense has a chance to maybe do a little something, and whether or not it can continue to build on that is going to be an interesting aspect of it. Because if you look at Notre Dame's just their last 2 games, and just kind of project it throughout the entire season, let's say like that was what they were for the entire season, from a yards per game wise, they'd be 30th right now, or let me see, 32nd right now in yards per game. You look at yards per attempt, and let me just kind of get it here. I'm kind of doing the math as we're talking. Yards per attempt the last 2 games divided by 62, and they'd be at 8.9, which is a really good number and would have them ranked 21st in the country. So not elite numbers by any stretch, but better numbers. Yep. And that's the thing, is there's been progress, Ryan, and they have to continue that, because this is a Stanford secondary that doesn't have a ton of coverage talent. As we talked yesterday, their secondary is better against the run. The safeties are better against the run than they are against the pass. Yes. Their best cover guy on that side of the ball is 5'9". And I mean, I'm not making fun of them. That's just the reality of it. And it's a matchup that Notre Dame should win because as of right now, it doesn't sound like their best corner is going to be healthy. And, so actually David Shaw did say that Kyle Blue Kelly does look like he's going to play this week, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be 100%.
Right.
So
probably on a pitch count of sorts or something.
Yeah. So it's a matchup you should dominate. And I will say this. This is a game I'd really like to see Tommy Rees force the issue a bit with the wide receivers. The reason I say that is because of your ability to dominate the run. If you can come out early and establish the run, it's going to set up some one-on-ones down the field. At some point in time this season, you're going to have to make your receivers more of a threat. You're not going to be able to beat the best teams in your schedule by just being tight end centric as much as they have been.
Yes.
Your receivers are ascending. They have played better the last 2 weeks. They need a game, Ryan, where it's like, okay, boom, this group is breaking out. I really think this is the perfect time for that. There's so many matchups on the perimeter in the slot that these receivers can take advantage of. I would love to see more of Jaden Thomas working from the slot like we saw last week and get him in matchups against the linebackers at Stanford. That'd be phenomenal. I'd love to see stuff where you're getting Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey in chase mode, which we saw last year. They had Kevin Austin had a lot of success on crossers and overs and things like that, getting him on the move. You've got guys that can make those plays. And for the love of all things holy, can I get a deep ball on the outside to one of your big boys, Tobias or Deion Colsey? Like, you know what I mean? Like, those things are there. Take those shots, in my opinion. But it's got to be part of your game plan going in. You sometimes when you're as good as they are at running back and tight end, catching the football, you can get a little too heavy on that. We saw that a little bit last week, Ryan. And now we saw them counter with the receivers a little bit with the seams and stuff, but you just got to get a little bit more, in my opinion, going. And the crossers and the overs to the receivers are going to be things that I think in this matchup, the way Stanford plays defense, I think those things can really be there in this game. And we saw Tommy Rees do that last year. Remember, he had that play where they scored a touchdown where he motioned Braden Lindsey down, got him matched up against the safety, ran a quick post route for a touchdown. Do you remember that? You had Kevin Austin catching a deep over route right over top of Jonathan McGill that went for a long play. So you saw that stuff a little bit last year. I want to see some of that stuff again this year as well.
It's going to be really interesting to see how Stanford kind of the game plan defensively, because, I mean, even on film right now, Brian, like, that they understand that they struggle stopping the run. So they'll play a lot of single high stuff at times, right? Like, they'll try to get at 7, sometimes 8 into the box at points because they understand that they just have not been a good team at stopping the run. And I'm curious because, I mean, we've talked about it, right? Notre Dame has been, but this is how their bread has been buttered the last couple of weeks, right? Like, they are a running football team who is taking what they can get in the passing game. They're taking advantage of the opportunities that have been in front of them over the last couple of weeks, it's been a winning formula at this point, right? But I think that Stanford, even without Caillou Blue Kelly and the struggles that they have had in the secondary, just from a depth perspective, I think that they're going to come into this football game and they are going to play a lot of one high stuff. I think they're going to get extra men in the box because I think they understand that Notre Dame has a clear advantage in the run game. And when that happens, that means that you have matchup opportunities in the pass game if you're Notre Dame, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to get some man-on-man coverage at times. You're going to get, heavy boxes where there's just going to be less guys working in space. There's going to be less traffic to deal with, kind of off RPO and play action. Like, you're going to get those opportunities. Notre Dame needs to capitalize on it. And I'm not even saying necessarily like explosive plays. Like, Notre Dame's going to need to make a couple explosive plays because that's just what again, if you're in a heavy running team, you need to have a couple of those plays every week where you make an explosive play. But Notre Dame's going to have one-on-ones. They're going to have open space. They need to make the easy things easy. I feel like at times this year in the passing game, easy stuff has been a little too difficult for Notre Dame at times, right? Make the easy things easy, hit a couple explosive plays, and you're going to have the opportunity to blow this team out. Like, if the running game is working and you're taking advantage of, if you're being opportunistic as a passing offense, Notre Dame is a much more talented team than the Stanford team. Like, let's not paint the picture that it's like a close contest, right? Like, Notre Dame, if they do those things, they have the opportunity to blow this football team out. But we have seen them not be able to take advantage of a lot of plays in the passing game. It's been better the last couple of weeks, but it still needs to get more advantageous. You need to be more opportunistic because there's going to be a lot of chances in this football game in the passing game, in my opinion.
Beefeater had a question that, Ryan, this was even asked before we started this part of the show, and it fits right into what we're talking about. He says, Ryan, can Stanford afford to load the box against us to stop the run? And if I'm Stanford right now and I'm watching film, I'd say, yeah, I'm taking that chance because they're not doing things to really exploit loaded boxes. Now, they started to the last couple games, but they're not doing enough or all the things that they can do to exploit loaded boxes. Part of that, Ryan, is because you've got a new quarterback. You went from one new quarterback to another new quarterback, and you don't necessarily throw. If Tommy Rees would have thrown the whole offense of Drew Pine in the first two games, it would not have worked, and we'd be ripping them. Yep. So it's not even a criticism of Coach Rees as much as it's okay, I understand why it's been kind of slow sledding of being – they were more aggressive against North Carolina than they were against Cal. They were more aggressive against BYU than they were against North Carolina. That tells me that they're – working Drew Pine into more comfortable role. So again, this is not a criticism of Tommy Rees. It's more of okay, I understand why you're doing, okay, but he's 3 games under his belt. He's playing well. Now it's time to really let loose because you have a matchup. And this is the matchup for it. I don't know if I would have let loose with a bunch of bombs against BYU last week because the one thing we talked about is this is a very veteran, good talent, successful pass defense that you're just not going to throw the ball 40 times against. They use their tight ends effectively. They use their receivers effectively to find the soft spots in the zone. They did it out. A lot of the stuff they did was out of sort of, on running down, 2nd and 2, 3rd and 2, throwing the ball. So I thought there was some good stuff there. As we said on Monday night, Ryan, I felt better about the pass game plan and the play calling coming out of the film breakdown than I did coming out of the actual game. Yeah. And I think I understood it more. The only thing I still didn't like was I still didn't understand the specific run plays you were using, but I felt better about the game plan after I dove into the film and said, okay, I get it now. Okay. And then you take the emotion of the game out and then you think about, okay, this was Drew Pine's 3rd start, right? Like they were more aggressive even than they were last week, but now you're getting to a matchup, Ryan, where it's like, okay, this is the one that you've got to go. And then with North Carolina was not a good pass defense, but it's a talented pass secondary.
Yes.
Now you're going against a unit that's not really either outside of Caillou Blue Kelly, who missed last week's game with an injury. So the point is you've got Drew more time. You've got the matchup that works. Be aggressive. And that doesn't mean coming out throwing bombs on 3 of your first plays. I'm actually okay coming out and Drew's going to be amped up. It's his first home game in a month. You don't want to get him get him into a nice little rhythm early, do kind of what you're due, get Stanford thinking, okay, here they go again, running in quick game, and then bam, then you take those shots. Right. So this isn't a thing where I want him to come out empty and run like 4 verts with an under, you know what I mean, on the first 3 plays of the game. It's not what we're talking about. You would love it. You would love it. No. I would have never even done that unless there was a reason for it. Like if I had Tyler Buckner quarterback, maybe. Because I think quarterback draws would be a very effective thing against this defense. Yes. But it wouldn't be to throw the football. Now, does that mean you don't go empty? Of course you will. But I'm not. No, but I'm just making the point. That's not what I'm advocating for doing coming out of the gate. It's build to that. But once you get to that and you set them up, then take advantage with those shots. And that's what I want to see. Because it's almost like, Ryan, after the game Michael Mayer had last week, I want to show the rest of the country that, hey, we can do this even if we don't throw Michael Mayer 15 passes. Right. I think that's an important thing to show because Clemson will be able to scheme to take him out of the game. Not take him out of the game, limit his effectiveness, right? I don't know if anybody can take him out of the game right now. He's just – because as we've seen the last 2 weeks, even if you cover him, Drew Pine's going to just throw it up and let Mayer go get it, but limit his effectiveness. BYU didn't do a good job of that. I think Stanford will try and do a better job of that, but I don't think it's going to matter. But Clemson can, right? So it's about it's the process, right? You're still building your offense because this is still building for November 5th is the way I look at this, right? And that's why I like that matchup.
And I don't think you have to get too cute with this matchup, Brian. Like we went through this, right? It's something where I don't need a bunch of trickeration. I don't need window shopping offensively, right? Like window dressing. I need Notre Dame to establish what they do well because I don't think that Stanford will be able to counteract it. I don't think they'll be able to. If Stanford comes out and just dominates Notre Dame in the run game as far as stopping the run, I would be shocked. I would be absolutely shocked.
That'd be a bad sign.
That would be a really, really bad sign. You want to talk about regression? That would be like SOS, red flag. Like, what the heck is happening right now?
The only way I'd be, and again, what would be the exception, Ryan? They're just 9 guys in the box and you throw for 475 yards, right? But I mean, like, there's always exceptions. But to your point is, like, barring something dramatic, if they don't run the football well in this game, it's going to be a concern.
Yep.
The other thing I would say about this matchup too, Ryan, is Stanford's an okay team at rushing the quarterback at times. They've had 2 games of 4 sacks this year, another game with 3, and then the other 2 games 0 and 1. So you've got to protect the quarterback. You've got to let Drew get into an early rhythm. And when you talk about trickeration, for me, that does not include jets and reverses. Those are, to me, need to be part of who you are. Right. I think those things need to be a part of who Notre Dame is with Braden Lindsey, especially. And like, they keep getting Lorenzo Styles. I don't think Lorenzo Styles is a great jet guy. And I know he had the one against USC, or was it Virginia last year, but they just weren't good on defense. They were coming off a game where they gave up 66 points to BYU. I think Braden Lindsey's still your best jet reverse guy, and I'd like to see him be used more there, in my opinion. But that's part of the offense. But yeah, I don't need to see like throwback passes and all that kind of stuff. Just keep building on who you want to be against Stanford, because that will be enough for you to be able to win this particular part of these 2 matchups.
I think offensively, what Notre Dame is good at, Stanford is also not good at stopping it, right? Yeah. So again, it's just, don't mess with the formula, man. Just come out and be you. Don't try to be something you're not, because I want to see them be able to open things up a little bit more in the passing game. But I want that to be out of who you are, right? Like, let's build on an identity. Let's not change an identity. That's what I'm looking for in this matchup.
I agree with you completely. Let's dive into the overall matchup of the Notre Dame offense against the Stanford defense. Again, it's a tale of really, I can't even say 2 halves. Well, yeah, 2 halves. I mean, this is a tale of 2 halves of the season. Notre Dame coming out of halftime against Cal has looked like a completely different team than they were the first 2.5 quarters of the season. I mean, you really could, because they had 7 points at halftime against Cal, came out and scored 17 points in the second half. And so if you'd have done that the whole game, that's 34 points against a pretty quality Cal defense. I mean, when they lost to Washington State last week, they got beat by 19. They only gave up 28 points. They lost because their offense couldn't do anything. Yep. So, yes, this is a matchup where it's like, look, if you look at who Notre Dame has been the last half of the second half of what they've been of their team so far this year, Ryan, then sure. Yeah, this is a more an identity. And if you kind of look at them the last 2 games, 25.6 points per game, they rank 94th in the country. That's abysmal. It's abysmal. The bright silver lining, and again, it's still not great, but it's better, is the last 2 games they've been a lot better. The last 2 games, they're averaging 36.5 points per game. They have had missed opportunities for more that have to get better at. Their red zone defense took a big step back last week. They went into last week's matchup 10th in the nation in red zone touchdown percentage. Now they're 46 because they went 1 of 4 against BYU in touchdowns. So, get back to that. But that's an area where Stanford has been pretty good as well at not letting touchdowns. So this is if you can thrive there, it shows that you are good at that. You just had a rough week against BYU. You just had some missed opportunities against BYU. So to me, Ryan, this is going to be a very telling matchup, because there's some weird, like this right here and this right here does not fit with this right here. I mean, Stanford ranks 27th in the country in third down and red zone touchdown defense, and they rank 30th in the country in third down offense or defense. Yet they rank 110th in scoring, 122nd in yards per play. Well, it tells me that they're just giving up a ton of big plays. We have not seen Notre Dame be a great big play offense. No. If you're going to be that team, that's why we're talking about using the receivers more in this game, and then getting back to using the backs as well. There's some things you can do because this is not a very athletic Stanford linebacking core. Would you agree with that outside of Tristan Sinclair?
100%. Yep.
The great game for you, whereas BYU last week had a pretty athletic linebacker core that was good in coverage. That's what we talked about. So, we said I'd like to see the backs used more in the pass game, and I still would have, but I understood to a degree why you didn't, because you can't necessarily outrun the Stanford BYU receiver linebackers are experienced. They're going to be in good position. So what do? Okay, let's get our big tight end in matchups where they can't cover them anyway. Okay, right. I get it. This is a matchup where you have a great running back versus linebacker matchup, but you also have really good receiver versus safety and receiver versus corner matchup. So take advantage and scheme them up, because Stanford can be schemed up for big plays, as we've seen. And Notre Dame has not been a very big play offense. I think they've got I think Brian Smith put something on our board today. I'm going to look it up, because he had something like they've had 10 plays of at least 30 yards all season, Notre Dame. That's it. And that's not a good number through 5 games. That's really not. Yeah, he said Notre Dame has had 11 plays of 30 or more. And so, yeah, you've got to be a bigger play offense. You have guys on your offense Renzo Styles can be a big play receiver. Braden Lindsey, we have seen in his career at Notre Dame, he can be a big play guy. Chris Tyree can be a big play guy. Now it's up to you against this defense. Say, okay, what are some things we can do to create bigger plays? Notre Dame has done a great job building their efficiency the last couple games, Ryan. Now we need to see them add explosiveness on top of that efficiency. And that's only going to come once Notre Dame proves to teams that their receivers, you have to prepare for their receivers, right? And that doesn't mean giving 75% of your snaps to Jaden Thomas and Matt Salerno. It just Jaden Thomas absolutely serves a role. We saw that last week. He can do things, but you've got to be able to use Lindsey more in the offense. You've got to be able to use Tobias more, Lorenzo more. Those guys have got to step up and be more big play guys. And hopefully this is the game where we can see that, Ryan. Because the third down offense for Notre Dame in the last 2 weeks has been they were in the 100s coming out of the Cal game in third down offense. When they jumped way up to 52nd.
It's a nice ascension in a couple weeks. It's not too bad. It's going in the right direction.
It's pretty good. It's really good.
Brian, I was going to say, man, I feel like we're talking again. We're evolving an identity, right? We talked about that on the defensive side of the football for Notre Dame, on the offensive side of the football. For this particular matchup in an over-encompassing way, right? Yes, Notre Dame needs to be more explosive. They need to create more big plays. But one thing that they can't sacrifice, to your point, is also the efficiency side of things, right? That they've been a more efficient team. Because when I look at this Stanford defense, I look at these raw numbers. This is not an efficient defense. 6.5 yards per play. That is not efficient. You are inefficiently giving up yards on every play. And the turnovers gained, we didn't talk about that one, right? 130th right now. They've only forced 2 turnovers on defense right now. Notre Dame in an efficient vacuum, right, is a team that is going to consistently gain X amount of yardage per play, and they are not going to shoot themselves in the foot, right? Let's not turn the football over a ton. Let's maintain the integrity of the offense, keep things moving. If you can do that and keep Stanford bad at what they're bad at right now, and also add explosive plays, then we're cooking, man. Then we're heading into a barometer where it's like, okay, this team could be a pretty good team. Because right now, my opinion of the last 2 games, building off of it, is that, hey, can Notre Dame play this brand of football where it's bully ball and it's efficient, right? Can they do that? If you can, you're going to win some football games, because you don't shoot yourselves in the foot. You keep yourselves on schedule. But if they can take the next step now and add some explosive plays on top of that efficiency, then that's when you're talking about them actually taking a nice step. Because if they stay the same that they've been the last 2 weeks, you're like, okay, that's good, man. That's a good offense, right? But if they take that next step now, that's where you see the growth. That's where you see the next level. And that's what you need to see, not only just to have a commanding victory over Stanford, but for the rest of the season, for the rest of Marcus Freeman's tenure, right? For Tommy Reese's sake, for all those things, you need to start building upon that. If you can, then I feel good about the direction of Notre Dame. If it just stays the same, though, that's where you is there a lull? Is there a ceiling? What's the issue there? I think that Notre Dame has a chance to really push that in the right direction this weekend as well.
Let's go defense, Ryan, and let's start off with this. I think this I want to talk about the defense overall. One thing I don't think Notre Dame fans have enough of appreciation against is, has the defense been great? No. Are there areas where it needs to get better? Absolutely. The defense can and must play better than it has so far through the first 5 games.
Yep.
What I don't think enough Notre Dame fans are taking into account, however, is the context of who Notre Dame has played. And I'm getting a lot of complaining about, they're not doing this and they're not doing that, and they need to play better here and play better there. And my thing is, I don't think the people that are doing that, and look, it's got to get better. This area run defense. I wrote an article this week saying the rush defense has to get better, and we'll talk about that. But I think what people also have to kind of consider is this is an offense, in my opinion, or defense, in my opinion, that also has played some very good football teams so far this year. Notre Dame has played 3 offenses that, after last week's games, rank in the top 20, and actually the top 17 in offensive efficiency. Ohio State's number 1. North Carolina, I think, is 14th, and BYU is 17th. So they've played really good teams so far this season. And what we have to look at is, like, has Notre Dame been good? No. Yes. Have they been great? No. But here's something you have to consider if you're going to evaluate the defense. Here's some numbers I'd like for you to consider. That Notre Dame has held every single one of their opponents to the defense has held every single one of their opponents to at least 8 points below their season scoring average and at least 59 yards below their season average. The lowest point difference was Cal. That was 8.8. The lowest yards difference was Marshall at 59. After you take out the 8.8 for Cal, every other opponent has been at least 10 points below their season scoring average against Notre Dame. Now, we're just looking about offense versus defense. So Marshall scored 26 points. I'm only counting 19 as we look at the matchup against the Notre Dame defense, because a pick 6 is not the defense giving that play up. You can't put that on the defense. Every other opponent has been at least 134, at least 102 yards below their season total in yards per game. Now, that's with the Notre Dame games in the statistics. If you take the Notre Dame games out, considering they held every team to below their season averages, those numbers go up even higher. If you take the Ohio State game out, if you take the Notre Dame game away from Ohio State, Notre Dame is held Ohio State to something like almost 40 points below their season scoring average. Over 30 points below their season scoring average. Even as it stands today, with Notre Dame holding them to 21 points, they've held Ohio State to 27 points below their season average, 148.7 below their season yards average. North Carolina, who is a top 15 offense, they held them to 10.3 points below their season scoring average. It gets close to 20 if you take the Notre Dame game out. And they held North Carolina, with those big plays at the end, still 134 yards below their season average. BYU was held 12 points below their current season scoring average and 134.8 yards below their season total offense average. Jaron Hall had his worst career game from a yard standpoint, his worst career game from a completion standpoint, and his worst career game from a completion percentage standpoint. Worst of his career as a starter. And then Marshall was held 10 points below their season average, 59 yards below their season average. Cal was held 8.8 points below their season average and 102 yards below their season average. So the defense has been good. Can it be great? Yes. But it needs to get better to be great. But let's not get it twisted. This has still been a good defensive football team. I think the issue that a lot of people are having, and I'm actually okay with it, is they hold the defense to such a high standard. They look at the numbers and the fact that they haven't had a great 4-quarter game, and they say that's not good enough. But again, it's harder to do that when you're playing really good offenses week after week. They're going to hit a stretch now over the next couple games where they're not playing very good offenses. Or UNLV's actually had a pretty decent offense this year, Ryan. For who they've played, it's a terrible matchup for them against Notre Dame.
Yes.
And so it's one bad offense or one not very good offense, and then another offense that you just need to be able to overwhelm. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I think we need to all understand and take into context. And I will say the one exception to that is the rush defense. So all that to say, this area right here, there's 2 areas where Notre Dame has to get better. One, we've talked about, limit the big plays that are coming from blown assignments. Right? Clean that stuff up. You've had like 5 of them all year. Clean that stuff up. That's got to be fixed now. The second one is the rush defense has not been good. And it's been an assignment standpoint from the linebackers, but there have also been times where teams have gotten movement that makes me not like what I'm seeing from the defensive line as well. Yep. This is the area that has to get better, and this is a game that they should get better, because Stanford, we talked about context. Stanford, through the first 2 games of the season, Ryan, they had 169 yards against Colgate And a Colgate alum said, "Thanks for not making fun of the school and the toothpaste thing." I like saying that's kind of low hanging fruit. So we're not going to go there.
I did that like 4 weeks ago.
Yeah,
so I'm guilty of that.
So we're not going to do that anymore. But Stanford, after the first 2 games, is averaging 195 rushing yards per game.
Yeah.
Then E.J. Smith got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, they've gone for 86 against Washington. They went for 127 against Oregon, and they went for 90 against Oregon State. That's 101 yards per game. They averaged 2.4 yards per attempt against Washington. They went for 3.7 against Oregon and 3.3 against Oregon State. Since EJ's been out, and as teams have kind of gotten used to that long mesh thing that they're doing, their run game has gone back to what it was last year, which is not good. And to make matters worse, Miles Hinton is coming back. Not 100%. He's missed the last 2 games, but the entire left side of their offensive line is out for this game. David Shaw reported, I think, yesterday.
Oh, man.
So Walter Rouse is out, and I'm trying to remember who the name of their left guard is. Ryan, can you help me out with this one? Their left guard's name is Jake Hornibrook.
Hornibrook, yes.
Yes.
I remember I looked at that name and I was like, I wonder if he's related to Alex Hornibrook that used to play for Wisconsin. I don't know if the answer to that.
I believe he is. I believe he is, but he was related to a kid that played at Clemson as well.
Gotcha.
I
was like, that seems like a pretty rare name. Like I haven't met too many Hornibrooks in my lifetime.
So not only is Stanford not good at running the football, but Stanford's going to be out 2 of their starting offensive linemen, and their best offensive lineman is coming back from an injury, which means he's unlikely that he's 100%.
Sure.
So this is flat out. This is the ultimate get right game for the Notre Dame rush defense, which it looked like it was ascending. That's the frustrating thing about last week. We talked about the overall team. Don't take a step back, right? And so Notre Dame took a step back. Now, I will say this. Breaking down the film, there were some mistakes made in that game. If we're going to make some excuses, no Jacob Lacey, no Howard Cross, that matters. Sure. And number 2, I felt like you look at the game plan, I felt like Notre Dame was okay. If you want to try to run the ball on us, run the ball on us. We're not going to let Jaron Hall beat us. And they didn't. Because BYU's not a great running team. So Notre Dame was willing to give a little bit in that as long as it meant they weren't throwing the ball over your head. And outside of one play, they didn't throw it over their head. And so I think schematically there was a little purpose to allowing BYU. Now, within that, there was bad execution, to your point, right? Which you broke down on Monday night. I don't think they were saying, hey, we'll give up 160 rushing yards. We're okay with that. No, they were just willing to, look, if you want to try to run it on us, you can run it on us. You can try and run it on us. If they would have cleaned up a couple plays, it would have been even better. The 3rd and long and then the touchdown run were two horrible plays. Outside of that, they got a 12-yard run here, 8-yard run here, but they weren't like ripping Notre Dame up. So you still got to clean some stuff up. But this is the kind of game where you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to make Stanford one-dimensional. Stanford does not have the weapons on the perimeter to beat you if they're one-dimensional. They can 100%. Beat you if there's some balance. And so they've got to dominate the line of scrimmage. They've got to shut down the run game. It's just like the North Carolina game. We've said this now 3 weeks in a row. They've played good. The best thing you can do to stop a good passing team is not let them have any kind of running attack. Where you can just then game plan for their pass game. And that means the defensive line, Howard Cross, I expect him to be back this week. The defensive line has got to figure out who's going to play. Gabriel Rubio is going to learn from the issues he had last week at times. The defensive line's got to dominate this game, Ryan. Absolutely has to dominate this game. And they've got to make, because you can't scheme to stop the run. When we talk about shutting down the run game of a team that likes to throw the ball, it's got to happen from it's basically your box, right? So it's like your Mike Will and your inside backers, your interior defensive linemen and your edge players. It's got to be that. It can't be run fits from the 2nd, 3rd level, and your rover's got to be, contracting down. It's got to be in the box, you dominate. And that's going to be the key to this game for me.
Well, and Brian, that was like the thing I was going to start with, with this conversation is you see these numbers for Stanford, they're bad, right? Like they're not good numbers. And that's even misleading because of what E.J. Smith was doing early on in the season. Like he's a really good running back. Right now, they don't have a guy that's a difference maker at the running back position. They don't. Like the what's his name? Filkins, I think is the running back that's
Casey Filkins, yeah.
Casey Filkins. Then they have Robinson as their backup, their key backup at the running back position. Yeah, and Caleb. If you watch them, Caleb, if you watch them on film, they are very one notes. They're not going to they're not going to create a bunch of explosive plays, right? Like that's not their game. That's not their game. I think Filkins is averaging like 4.1 yards a carry. Like he is a very keep it moving type of running back, right? Mm-hmm. So I think for me, these numbers, Notre Dame needs to come out of this football game with us talking about how those rushing numbers on their side of things are a lot better next week, right? Like they cannot have a performance where your ungap sound and you give up a long run or something like that. Like this cannot be the game where there's those stupid plays where you shoot yourself in the foot because you're not doing your job, right? We need a good, cohesive ability to stop the run this week against Notre Dame. And to your point, and I agree with it 100%, Notre Dame defensive line-wise, like Isaiah Foskey, but like for instance, right? Isaiah's had done a really good job the last couple weeks, especially I think in the run game, setting firm edge, being physical with his hand usage, all that good stuff. In this game, whether it's against a under less than 100% Miles Hinton or a backup left tackle, whether that is Barrett Miller or whoever it ends up being the starting offensive tackle there, you have to dominate that football game, man. Yeah. We've been talking about you all offseason and even until now about potential first-round pick, dominant football player, all these things, which he is. He has to show it in this game, man. Right. Like, this can't be a game where he's just invisible for parts of this game. Like, you need to dominate this game. We've talked a ton about Jason Adamalola, right? With Hornibrook out and the interior offensive line just not being very good in general, even when he does play.
He was. Would you say he was their best interior lineman so far this year, Hornibrook?
Him or Nugent,
the center?
I guess. Yeah.
Drake's the center,
I mean, they're both okay players. Like, they're not bad football players, but especially with that unit having a player down, I mean, Jason Adamalola needs to dominate this football game. Howard Cross is near 100%. He needs to dominate this football game. You need to see the defensive linemen absolutely come out of this game and say, like, Stanford offensive line-wise had nothing for that group. They had nothing for them. Like, there's no excuses in this game. This is one where you're playing a bad unit overall, offensive line-wise. They have not been a good unit, and they're down two of their starters. Like, there is zero excuses for this to not be a dominant performance by this defensive line and this front seven. Notre Dame needs to play a lot better than they have been on the second level especially, but it all starts, to your points, with the defensive line dominating this football game.
Ryan, the chat has gone off the rails. Anthony Solomon said, so Brian is advocating for Pine to run the triple option. Mark Brown said Brian needs to get over his love for the triple option. I don't know what started all that or what I said.
Did you say something about the triple option?
I have no idea. But the chat has gone off the rails talking about the triple option. So I don't know what I said to say that. But Ryan, I think you nailed the analysis of this. And the one thing I'll add, where the second level and third level, when I say second level, the prim, so the rover, safeties, and corners, where they need to be good against the run, is on the stuff with the tight ends and the reverses. Because here to show you how it's even worse, EJ Smith was averaging 6.9 yards per carry. He was, like you said, the one note guy. EJ could hammer it up the middle, but he was really smooth. He had great feet. He had a couple cutbacks against USC where I'm like, I didn't know he could do that. Like, he was an okay player in high school. I didn't love EJ coming to high school. We had some cuts. I'm like, boy, that kid's got a chance to finally get Stanford out of it doldrums as a rushing team. Since he's been hurt, it's been bad. Filkins is averaging 4.1 yards per carry. Robinson, you mentioned, is averaging 3.1 yards per carry. The number 3 back, Brendan Barrows, averaging 4.17 yards per carry. That's on 6 carries. Here's where they've found success rushing the football. Benjamin Urasek, their tight end, has a 50-yard gain on a reverse.
Yeah.
Michael Wilson, their wide receiver, has 3 carries for 40 yards, and Elijah Higgins has a carry for 18 yards. You take those wide receivers. I'm actually going to do that now that I'm thinking about it. I'm going to take those plays out of the equation, and Stanford is averaging, let's see here, on the season, 117 yards per game. And I'm going to take I got to take 5 carries out of it. They're averaging 3.5 yards per carry. You take the tight end and reverses and stuff out of the equation, they go from 4.1 per carry to 3.5. They go from 138.6 per game to 117. That's where the third level in the perimeter can be effective, is be disciplined.
Yes.
Right? Be disciplined. Because Casey Filkins is not beating you on the perimeter. At least he shouldn't. It's going to be a bad sign if he does. Where they can hurt you on the perimeters with the jets and the reverses. So being smart in that regard is going to be the key for that one.
My eyes are going to be on Benjamin Urasek this whole game, Brian. Like that's going to be the guy, man. We're talking about the passing game here in a second, right?
Let's do it. It's a good segue right into that, Ryan. So let's dive into it. Let's dive into it because this is the one area where Stanford can match up with Notre Dame statistically. This is the one area this entire football game from a big pick. I mean, there's like a stat here, a stat there. Just I'm saying overall statistically, on paper they can match up. Because Notre Dame has one of the worst touchdown to interception ratios allowed in the country because they only have one touchdown or one interception. We saw that last week. Yep. And part of that, and that's partly why they rank 93rd in pass efficiency defense. Although their pass defense has been good, their pass defense is still giving up, to me, too high of a yards per completion percentage rate. Because of the first two games. But the last three games, it's been much better, much more disruptive. They allowed 70.6 completions in game one, 76.2 in game two, which is terrible. Yeah. The 3 games since, they held Cal to 43.2, North Carolina to 53.1, and BYU to 52.9. So they're definitely getting better than what they've been. That's a great sign. That's a great sign. Now, they've got to continue that this week because if you can make Stanford inefficient in the pass game, they have no chance to score. The only hope Stanford has in this game is to beat you in the pass game. That means protecting the quarterback, something they have not been good at, and it's even worse now that they're down 2 offensive linemen. Yep. And so that's defense. You talked about the D-line needs to dominate. Foskey needs to dominate. This is an opportunity for Foskey to say, okay, guys, I've been good this year, but not great. It's time for me to take this thing over. Great chance for him to do that. Same with Jason Adamiola to do the same thing. Yep. But they have to be able to handle this. And I'm very curious to see what Al Golden's game plan is going to be because this is a completely different pass game than what they've played all year. Yes. It's more of a West Coast pass offense where David Shaw has adapted his West Coast off. I mean, you're going to see Y banana. You're going to see all, you're going to see all the West Coast stuff, right? You're going to see Y option. You're going to see all that kind of stuff. But he has adapted his West Coast to fit the fact that the one thing he's been able to consistently get on his team from a recruiting standpoint is giants. Yes. Right? And so he's going to do that. What's the plan for that? I'm very curious about that. Does Notre Dame play more cover 2? Do they do more things to help over the top? Like, what's the plan going to be to kind of defend against the size that Stanford brings? Because Notre Dame's been playing teams that had precision route runners and quickness and speed. They haven't played a team that just has size, right? Even Ohio State. Marvin Harrison's a big kid, but he's more of a speed guy. He's not a guy that Ohio State at the time was just throwing a bunch of jump balls to, although maybe they should have after the catch he had against Michigan State last week. But they didn't do that against Notre Dame, right? No. North Carolina doesn't really do that. BYU's not that kind of team. They will. You can have blanket coverage on these kids, and Tanner McKee is still going to throw the ball to them. Yep. And so what's the plan for that? What's the plan to help for that? But that also goes back to why the box has to be so good against the run, because if you have to start using your safeties to run fit against with the linebackers, if the linebackers don't play a much better game this week and the safeties have to help as much as they have in recent weeks, and you've got to play a lot of cover 1, a lot of cover 3, Stanford will hurt you on the perimeter with jump balls. I don't care how good your coverage is. And that's the concern. When we talked about Stanford can do things to hurt you, Ryan, this is the area we were talking about. Yeah. Because they have Elijah Higgins at 6'3", 234 pounds. They have Humphreys, who's a taller player. They have Bryson, last name's escaping me for a second. Bryson, the one that injured himself. Kid? Yeah, Bryson Tremaine. Yep, Bryson Tremaine, who's a taller player. Michael Wilson is the smaller wide receiver, and he's 6'2", 210, right? Yes. Like he's a big boy as well. So let me read this real quick, Ryan. I'm going to just read the size of their starting lineup. Michael Wilson, 6'2", and I'm going to go smallest to biggest height-wise. Yep. Michael Wilson is 6'2", 210. Elijah Higgins is 6'3", 234. Bryson Tremaine is 6'4", 212. Benjamin Urasek is tight end, 6'4", 242. Their backups, Medea Rubin. I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce it that way, even if it's not, because I think that's just flipping hilarious. That looks like someone's name is Medea. 6'2", 209. Silas Starr is 6'2", 221. John Humphreys, who plays a decent amount, is 6'5", 209. And their backup tight end, Sam Roush, is 6'5", 245. Yes. Their smallest guy is 6'2", 209. That's. I mean, yes, they're big. They're big,
huge.
and they move okay. I mean, these aren't like tall, slow guys either. I mean, they're not burners, but these are guys that are good athletes for their size.
Yes,
as well.
I mean, like I wrote in the preview of a couple of their offensive standouts. I mean, I wrote that Elijah Higgins has pretty good explosiveness for his size, right? Like he's not going to run by you, but he can get on top of a guy and have some leverage to win down the football field, right? Like this is what Stanford has. Brian, it's interesting because I wanted to have this conversation with you that you say, what is Al Golden going to do? What's his game plan going to be? This is what I am interested to see from that perspective, right? So you have a bunch of wide receivers that can win some jump balls, can win some contested catches, but they're not after catch players, right? Like Michael Wilson's the only guy that gives you a little bit, in my opinion, of the mainstays, a little something after the catch. Even he doesn't give you like a ton, but he gives you a little bit, right? So
he can catch and run too, right? He's the one guy that you worry about, like, catching. If he gets a step on you on a cross, he can, not lose that ground. And so, yes, in that regard, that to me is catch and run as well.
100%.
But not make you miss. There's
exactly.
To your point.
This is not a yak team, right? This is not like a yards after catch. They're going to make you miss in space, break a ton of – I mean, they'll break some tackles because they're huge, but they're not going to turn a medium gain into an explosive play usually, right? Like they're usually we're going to catch the ball where we are, and we're going to gain maybe a couple more yards, and that's going to kind of be the impact of what our impact is in general, right? So you put that into the conversation of, hey, offensive line has not been very good. They've given up a lot of sacks, 16 on the season, ranks 107th in the nation. And also you're down to your offensive linemen. One is, arguably your best. I mean, whether you want to, I think it's Miles Hinton, but like if you want to say Walter Rouse is the best Stanford offensive lineman, like cool, we can have that conversation. I'm good with that. But so you have an offensive line that's struggling with injuries on top of it. You have a quarterback that's a statue, right? Like he is not moving out of the pocket. And you have wide receivers that can't really hurt you getting into space and creating explosive plays.
And with pure stretch. Just pure stretching you, yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, okay, if we get a pressure, if Notre Dame gets early pressure on Tanner McKee, is there a player where like, they hit a quick spot on an underneath route and then he's able to explode for 50 yards? Like there's nobody on that side, right, for me. So I'm curious, Brian, like, because I always talk about it like almost every week, how Notre Dame getting home with 4 is so important because they have guys up front that gives you that opportunity potentially. I'm curious if Al Golden is more aggressive from a blitzing perspective this week. I am really curious about that. I don't know if that's the answer. I don't know if that's what he's going to go for. I don't know what his ideology on it's going to be, but I'm interested with the injuries to the offensive line, with the wide receivers that aren't going to create a ton of explosive plays after the catch, and a quarterback that is not the fleetest of foot. I'm curious to see if he just says, hey, we're going to bring a little more pressure than maybe we have been in some weeks, because we know if we get quick pressure on this team, they're probably not going to do well against it. Just my thought process.
I personally, because of what we talked about, the other things, I would say, let's see if we can get pressure with our front 4.
Yep.
I would do no more than, like, on first and second down, I'm doing run stunts, which then turn into, I mean, that's kind of how you should teach it, right? A run stunt, like you hit the gap, and if you see pass, you run through it and you get to the quarterback. I mean, you don't just stop like, oh shoot, they're not running. I guess I can just hang out right here, right? You have a responsibility to run through to the back. Could be that responsibility, run through to the quarterback. I would do maybe some run stunts early downs, but even then, this is a game where I want to dare Stanford to run the football on me. And so I'm going to play my linebackers on normal depth. I'm not going to do a lot of triggering. On third and longs, they've done a lot of pressures. I'm not doing that this game. Honestly, I'm going to play cover this game, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm making the throwing lanes to the big guys as sort of crowded as possible. Because here's why. If I got a 6'3" Elijah Higgins running against Jaden Mickey, assuming Tariq Bracy doesn't play, or even Tariq Bracy if he plays in that matchup, and honestly, this is going to sound terrible. Never want Tariq Bracy to get hurt, but the timing of it actually works out for Notre Dame. To me, this is going to be a game where Tariq either was going to play a ton or he's going to play outside, and he is the worst matchup that Notre Dame has in this game. Because what's the one thing Tariq has always struggled with? Big guys that they throw jump balls to, and there's nothing. He's like 5'10". There's nothing to do about it.
Yep.
So this wasn't going to be a game. This is a Clarence Lewis game. This is a Benjamin Morrison game, a Cam Hart game, in my opinion. So do you put one of those bigger guys inside if you're going to go nickel? Or do you say, hey, look, we're going to let Jack Kaiser match up against Elisha Higgins? I don't love that matchup either. Maybe you do some things where you get a safety down in the box. Maybe you say, hey, look, we're going to put Ramon Henderson in the slot this week. I don't know what the answer is from a personnel standpoint, but philosophically, Ryan, this is a game where I am going to say we're going to cloud up the throwing lanes as much as possible, and we're going to trust our defensive line to dominate. Now, if they can't, then I have some stuff we've worked on from a triggering standpoint where I can then say, okay, let's heat them up a little bit.
Right.
But if you get into that situation, you're going to be in trouble, because what I think is if you do that with your backers, then that allows your safeties to then do a little bit more over the top to protect against some of the outside stuff. So I can play cover 2, allow Cam Hart, allow Benjamin Morrison, allow Clarence Lewis to be a little bit more aggressive at the line, get them off their tracks. That's the reason the thing I like about cover 2 against bigger receivers. The danger is the cover 2 hole throws when you have an NFL arm at quarterback, and they have an NFL arm at quarterback, right? So, but to me, the Notre Dame has the length to kind of somewhat protect against that. I am playing cover 2, and I'm really making sure that if I'm Al Golden and Mike Mickens, that I'm teaching them to ride that, get underneath that vertical release by number 2. But I want you to be physical against that guy, slow down their releases, and then I think if you're able to do that, then it can be success. I would also, this is going to sound a little strange, I'd play my cover 2 from tighter depth, because I don't think you need to be 12 to 15 and then bam, getting off of the top, because they don't have the burners on the outside. So I'd play it from a little bit tighter depth, because again, it's all about clouding up the windows as much as I can. And if Stanford wants to try to beat me with bombs, then that's fine. Brandon Joseph can get back over top of that from 10 yards. You know what I mean, Ryan? So those are some things that I would do, because I'm dropping my linebackers. This is a great game where Maris Luafau should be able to use his length to his advantage. It's a game where Prince Colley can use his speed and length to his advantage. And then honestly, a guy that I would play a bunch this week would be Junior Tuihalamaka. I would play him a bunch this week at Mike with JD Bertrand and say, your guys' job, you're playing with the line. You see run, you crash it. Right. And then, then I'd play Jack Kaiser more outside this game. Let him protect against the tight ends and things like that, and then use your safeties to help protect against some of your backside safety. So I'm not saying I'm playing all cover 2. I'd play some 4. I'd play some roll. The point being is I'm going to use my safeties a little bit to be prepared to help against some of those outside one-on-ones. But I'm trying to funnel them back inside with my alignment, and then I'm using my linebackers to then get depth. Because one of the hardest defenses to throw on, in my opinion, is a cover 2 defense that gets pressure with its front 4. Because the weakness to cover 2, in my opinion, is down the field. I can do things against you down the field. I can attack the middle of the field. I can hit those down the field hole throws. I can do things where I can level a linebacker and things like that. But those things all take time. Cover 2, to me, it was designed first and foremost to protect against the quick game, right? We're going to take the quick game away. Well, Stanford will run some quick game. They run a decent amount of quick game. You're prepared. You're going to take away the Y options, the slides, the stuff like that, the now screens. You're taking that away. And then if you can then get pressure with your front 4, that means you can drop all 3 of your linebackers into your zones, into your hook curls, into your middle of the fields and things like that, which means now the intermediate stuff is also clogged up a little bit. And now I've got to try to attack down the field a little bit more. Well, that's a harder to do when you've got your front 4 getting the pressure on you. So that's why, Ryan, for me, I'm going to come out and give my front 4 an opportunity to dominate this game. If they can't, then I have some answers for it. But if they can dominate this game, especially in the pass game, Ryan, and you're dropping 7 into coverage, they're going to have a hard time. And you know who did this? You know who did this defense perfectly against a team with big receivers? Stanford. This is exactly what Stanford did to Notre Dame in 2010. Because Notre Dame's 2 best receivers were who? Michael Floyd. They had, at the time, Kyle Rudolph was still playing. Tyler Eifert, who hadn't really caught a lot of balls. Duval Kamara was playing a decent amount for that team as well. And so what Stanford did is they rushed 4, dropped 7, or rushed 3, dropped 8. Because they knew they could shut down Notre Dame's run game with their box. And then they took away all the quick game because Notre Dame was running a lot of quick game, a lot of intermediate stuff. They were able to take Michael Floyd out of the game just by their alignments, and Notre Dame didn't have the time to get the ball down the field. I think it's a very similar game plan to what Notre Dame should employ against Stanford this weekend, and dare them to run the ball. If Stanford's going to try to beat you running the ball, then this should be a blowout. So Good question, Ryan. Now, what would you do? I mean, would you be more aggressive with it?
I'm in between on it. I kind of like the aggressiveness side of things, but like I guess maybe my holdback to buying completely into playing coverage is that when we've seen Notre Dame play cover 2 and other zone coverages, I feel like they haven't been as aggressive passing guys off as they need to be, right? Like they're not contacting enough. They're not being vocal enough to who's vacating zones, who's coming into zones. If Notre Dame was better at it, I would be like, yeah, man, let's play cover 2 all day because it makes complete sense to your point, right? Like it would make it extremely difficult. I just think of like last week when I'm like, okay, they're playing cover 2 there, and then they just kind of let a guy loose, right? It's just, or 2 weeks ago, where I'm just like, it's just bad communication, man. And Clarence Lewis, the one against North Carolina, the long one, like he was in cover 2 and he just let the guy just go straight by him. Like he didn't contact him at all. I'm like, you need to contact and be vocal, man. Like you have to communicate on the back end. If Notre Dame was better at that, I would be like, yeah, I agree 100% with you. I'm just struggling a little bit just because we have seen some inconsistencies in that area, just a little bit.
And then, we talk about get right games, right? You're going to have to be able to do that. You're going to have to be able to have those. You're going to have to be able to play more zone at times. You're going to have to. So get better at it. Practice 100%. It. Because here's the thing. If you're going with the game plan that I'm talking about, that means you're getting 1 million reps at it this week in practice.
Sure.
Right. And so, and then, hey, Coach Mickens, Coach O'Leary, we got to really focus on this. Coach Mick, what's the point of emphasis this week? Really doing a better job of contact and then riding through the turn. That's what they're not doing a great job of in cover 2 is it's about being physical and then riding through the turn. Because what happens is a lot of corners on cover 2, they'll like get a jam. And then when they turn around because what they're playing a zone, they're going to play underneath the vertical route until they're threatened outside.
Yep.
And so you're basically bracketing high-low that outside receiver. Well, what a lot of corners struggle with is they will lose guys in that turn. And that's where teams will kind of hit that hole throw. So the thing I'm focusing on this week is really, making that initial contact and then riding through the turn to then see if there's somebody coming back inside, right? And if you don't see it, then you keep working with them. But if you don't ride them through the turn, then you're going to lose the guy. Now I'm chase mode, and now I got to go find him. And that's how they're going to hit those 6'3" high back shoulder cover 2 hole throws, right? In front of Houston Griffith and DJ Brown and those guys, right? So that would be my point of emphasis for the corners this week. And you've got the corners to do it. I mean, Cam Hart should be great at that. Should be. Benjamin Morrison should be really good at that. He's a pretty physical kid in coverage. It's something Clarence Lewis should be a master of. I mean, that's something he needs to be a master of because that's
just like Julian Love was, man.
Was brilliant at that. Correct.
Yeah.
So, and then also you can keep things in front of you and close on the quick game. If they want to throw some slides at you, your corners are there to drive on it and break those things up. So, yeah, it's not something they've been good at. I think you're absolutely right. That's maybe another, and I didn't think about this, but it actually adds to me wanting to do this more because that means 1 million reps at it. And, you get better at it, do some of it next week against UNLV and really make it a point of emphasis. Because I also think it's a philosophy that you're going to want to have against Syracuse as well.
Yeah.
And so
they have some size as well. Wide receiver,
have some size, but also they're a run-oriented team.
Yeah.
And so that would be something to allow you to to be able to effectively handle that. So good question, Ryan. Very good question, because this is the matchup that is the concern. This is it. If Stanford's going to pull off an upset of this game, or even more so make it a game, it's going to be because of this part of the game. It will. And USC was able to limit their effectiveness in the pass game really well, and they did it with pressures. Like they got good pressure, got their hands up, and Tanner McKee had a really off game. They just never let Tanner McKee get in rhythm, and that was a big part of that game, a really big part of that game. And but the biggest thing is how many sacks they had in that game? 5.
Wow.
All right, and that's one area where USC's been a lot better than I anticipated. They've been a pretty good pressure team this year. They dialed up a lot of pressures. They did it a little bit differently. They dialed up pressures against Stanford, and it worked. But to me, that's just not the route that I would go. Because I also think Stanford missed a lot of opportunities against USC. I mean, you worked that game. There's a lot of chances for Stanford to make plays in that game. They just didn't execute real well.
I mean, so, I think the formula to your point is Washington, right? Washington was getting home with 4 all day against Stanford. Like they could not block those defensive ends. So, it's going to be interesting.
And I would argue that was their most convincing loss. That and Oregon were their 2 most convincing losses. I mean, they actually moved. I mean, USC scores early. And Stanford goes right down the field and gets in, and Tanner McKee throws an interception on he tried to do one of those back shoulder things, but he threw it low, so it got tipped up in the air and picked off and ran out of the end zone. Right? I mean, they had 2 red zone turnovers in that game.
And he almost, if I remember correctly, on that drive where he threw that interception, didn't they almost complete a throw in the back of the end zone for a touchdown? Right? That was just ruled out of bounds.
I think it was that drive. Yes, I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah, I think I remember.
I believe it was that drive. But there was a lot of opportunities against USC to get more points. Yes. They were not in the Washington or Oregon games, in my opinion, especially the Washington game. So yes, because that's supposed to be the best part of your team, right? I mean, I would sit there. Washington. What I would have done. It's a little too late now because it's Wednesday. But what I would have done is yesterday before practice, I'd have let Coach Washington know, hey, I'm coming into your meeting at the very beginning, just letting you know. Let Coach Laurinaitis handle the linebackers for a little bit. You got him just at the beginning. And I say, listen, fellas, you've got to be the foundation of our defense. This game, our game plan, I'm putting a lot of it on you guys. Our game plan doesn't work if you guys don't dominate. And I'd put it on them. They're veterans. They got to be able to handle that. I need you guys to be on top of your games. I need you to be locked in, because if you guys are locked in, you guys are gonna take this game over. And I think they need that kind of game. I think now the defensive line, and we have a question about that in the mailbag. Defensive line's played a lot better the last 3 games, especially against the pass rush. They've got to be at their best in this game, because if they can be, they don't have to be, but if they are, then Notre Dame, they have to be at their best in this game if Notre Dame's going to dominate. Yeah, that's my whole point. If they dominate the point of attack, then this game is just not going to be close. And that's the weirdest thing about the Stanford team. Like, Notre Dame should, based on what we've seen on paper and on film, should dominate Stanford in the trenches. And if you want to know why Stanford has faded in the last 5 years, that statement right there sums up what happened to Stanford.
Yep. There's no David DeCastro walking through that door, man. There's no
just the attitude. But see, the thing is, they're on the roster.
It's fair.
But they're not playing that way.
Right.
I mean, Miles Hinton
Hinton
is exactly the kind of guy that you expected Stanford to have 10 years ago. Big. I mean, he's I would argue he's more talented than Andre Speed, just athletically.
Oh yeah.
Right? But he doesn't play that way. He doesn't play the way Josh Garnett played. He doesn't play the way David DeCastro is the ultimate of that. He doesn't play the way Nate Herbig did early in his career before all the injuries set in, right? He doesn't play that way. And that's the thing, but it's the whole line, and it's been that way for years, and that's why Notre Dame should dominate this matchup.
Well, I was gonna say, Brian, like, I mean, think about, like you said, the last few years. I mean, they underdeveloped Foster Sorrell, they underdeveloped Walker Little. They've underdeveloped a lot of pretty talented offensive linemen over the years, which is pretty wild to think about.
Ryan, let's get to the last part of this matchup, and that is just sort of just putting the kind of the bow on it, and that is the scoring offense against the scoring defense for Notre Dame. Notre Dame's red zone defense this year has been really bad at stopping touchdowns, but the funny thing is they make teams work to get into the end zone in the red zone. They really make teams work, but they just can't close out drives, and that's something they're going to have to get better at, obviously, and Stanford is a really good – this is the weirdest thing about Stanford. They are in the top 30 in red zone touchdown percentage on both offense and defense. I'm going to look, 27th on offense or defense and 27th on offense. And I actually looked at that because when I did the initial thing, I was like, hold on a second. Did I look at the wrong thing? Did I double up on one? Did I look at like the offensive red zone or defensive red zone for both? And then then put 27th in for both. And I went and looked it up. I was like, nope, I got it right. They are 27th in both. I'm looking it up again. They are 27th in touchdown percentage in both offensively and defensively. The problem is, Ryan, they just can't get into the red zone very often. I mean, 15 times in 5 games. That's only 3 red zone trips a game.
It's so weird because this offense does seem like it kind of lives off of explosive plays, right? In the passing game, even though they're not very explosive in the passing game.
Yeah.
Like, it's really odd, man. It's a really strange unit. Again, I mean, there's not many excuses anymore, Brian. Like, this, there just isn't, right? Like, this is a game where you're clearly the more talented team, right? Like, your defense is clearly your front four is clearly more talented than the offensive line for Stanford. Your corners and, well, your secondary in general should be able to match up pretty well, not size-wise, but from a talent level perspective against a Stanford. So you need to force this team into some bad decisions, which is why I kind of pose the pressure situation against a Tanner McKee, because Tanner McKee will make some bad decisions at times when he is put into bad situations. But on the other side of it is that he's not afraid to make any throw. Like, he's not, man. He'll put the ball out there. So he's the guy that you really need to frustrate in this one.
That's the key right there, from what kind of building off what you're saying earlier, Ryan. When I talk about the game plan I'm talking about, it is not a never blitz. It's just be smart with it. And that's where you can kind of get him into some mistakes. My fear is that you blitz a bunch and David Shaw starts saying, okay, we're just going to attack the one-on-ones. We're going to back shoulder you all day. And they can. And that's what I don't necessarily want to see Notre Dame do. You don't ever, I mean, I don't know if you ever go through a game saying, hey, we're not going to blitz today. I don't know if you ever do that, except if maybe you're playing the triple option. That's not really a team you want to blitz a whole lot. But it's just, that's not the base of who you're going to be. You know, I'm not going to overwhelm them with numbers.
Ryan, always comes back to the triple option.
So that's kind of what I see. Third down defense has been really inconsistent for Notre Dame this year. It's going to have to be good. I think that as long, you know, I think they should be able to get a lot of stops early. It's funny. The third down offense for Notre Dame, Ryan, was really bad the first 3 games, got a lot better the last 2. Notre Dame's third down defense has been similar. They had 2 bad games. They were not good against North Carolina, not good enough against North Carolina, and was a money down for Ohio State in that game. Ohio State's the only team that's gone over 50% against Notre Dame this year. They were very good against Marshall on third down statistically, very good against Cal, very good against BYU on third down. The problem is they've given up the clutch third downs. Yeah, that's been the issue. You were great because if I say to fans, Notre Dame was really good on third down against Marshall, your first thought is, wait a minute, hold on a second. Do you not remember the 3rd and 9 they gave up at back? Right. That's the thing. Overall, 4 of 13. That's pretty good. If you're holding teams to 4 of 13 on third down, you're doing a pretty good job. The problem has been that clutch one. And I just said that they were really good against BYU. They held BYU to 3 of 9 on third down. The problem, they gave up that one bad third down conversion. They were backed up. That's the problem, right? Clean that stuff up. That's really the key for Notre Dame's defense. If Notre Dame's defense can just clean up the dumb mistakes, and none of them were, wow, what a great play by that kid. None of them were that, right? That's why we don't bring up the catch that Cam Hart gave up at the beginning against North Carolina, or the touchdown against Jaden Mickey against North Carolina, or not touchdown, but the big play against North Carolina, because that was just a great ball and a great catch. And even if Jaden Mickey doesn't mistime his jump, I don't know if he can get to that ball. That was a great ball. It was an NFL throw to an NFL receiver.
Yep.
And so you're going to give up those occasionally. I can live with those, Ryan. That's where you say make them earn their yards. The blown coverage against Ohio State, unacceptable. Both of them, right? The Cam Hart trying to undercut that out throw, that should have been a 9-yard completion, not a 50-yard touchdown. Yep. You know, the play against the second touchdown against Ohio State. I mean, 2 of Ohio State's 3 coverage touchdowns were on blown assignments, mistakes, not guys just getting beat, just mistakes. Same thing against Marshall, just blown assignment on third down. You just do your job, just do your flipping job on 3rd and 9. Notre Dame right now is at worst 4-1, right? At worst 4-1. And it was the same thing against BYU. Just do your stinking job on 3rd and 17, and guess what? Notre Dame still wins. They won the game, but it's a much more convincing victory. Clean that stuff up, and this defense then becomes the defense we thought it would be. It really does. It really does. I truly believe that. Clean that, and it changes the entire perception of the defense. Notre Dame's defense has been excellent outside of 10 plays this year. Think about that. But those 10 plays happened, and it factored into you losing to Marshall, right? I mean, there you go. That's really where we're at. So that's the breakdown of the Notre Dame-Stanford on paper matchup. It's one that Notre Dame really has the advantage in every way. Stanford special teams has been okay, Ryan. It's not an area where they can or should overcome it. It's the same thing. Last week, Notre Dame's special teams have been very good this year outside of a couple mistakes. Last week, we saw one as a punt return against BYU. So I think just play clean there. It's another area where Notre Dame should have it. Because to me, special teams is more about, do you have better dudes than they have? And Notre Dame has better athletes than Stanford. So they should be able to cover well and maybe get a block or a return or something in the game.
Yep.
So that's going to do it for this part of the show. We're going to have a mailbag next. We already have 28 questions, so we're going to try to roll through those as quickly as possible before Ryan's got to get out of here. But before we get to the mailbag, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And remember, if you are going to be at Notre Dame on Saturday, make sure that you follow me on Twitter. Make sure you follow Ryan on Twitter. Make sure that you're locked into the message board because we are going to have an on-campus event on Saturday. It's going to be around 3 or 3:30. We're going to have a live show. So if you're not on campus, we're going to have a live show at that time too. So we're going to have a live broadcast from campus. It's going to be a big event. We're going to break some news. Can I say it, Ryan? We're going to break some news at that time too. So you're going to want to be there. And if you're in town, you're going to want to be there in person. I promise you it'll be worth it. If it's raining, I will have my tent. We'll pop the tent up for that part of the show, and we'll have some fun with it. So definitely make sure you stay locked into that and everything else going on in the Irish Breakdown podcast. So Ryan, let's dive into the mailbag. We have a lot of great comments. The 28 that we have starred so far, and I'm not even to the end. A lot of that there are also some really good comments that we had today too that I think are good. But let's just dive right into the questions first with the super chats. Christopher Mora with a super chat. Thank you, Christopher. How much more do you need to see from the offensive line to be a Joe Moore contender? Not winner per se, but at least top 3 to 5 in the country, which kind of was a discussion we had, Ryan. I'll let you start off. What is it that you need to see from them from now moving forward? Not what we've seen in the past, but from now moving forward, what do you need to see from them improvement-wise and those type of things to say by the end of the year to say what you think is possible that they are without question, and at least in the conversation of the Joe Moore Award?
I think that as long as they keep building and they maintain the success that they've had, the maturation that they've had, it's the biggest thing for me, Brian, is when Notre Dame plays against the best fronts that they are going to play in during the season. I think about specifically against Clemson, right? Like that's going to be a big test for Notre Dame because even if Notre Dame plays great from an offensive line perspective, Clemson's still going to get some. Like they are, man. They're that talented. They have multiple, and I mean, they have Trenton Simpson on the second level. They have some young linebackers who are the real deal as well. They have Miles Murphy, Brian Brissy, Xavier Thomas. Like they have NFL level defenders in the first and second level.
A lot.
If you're Clemson. So Notre Dame can have a great performance offensive line wise and still not perceived to be dominant because Clemson's going to get some stuff, right? But they can still have that type of game. I think for me though, it's if they play consistently close to where they are, not even close to where they are now, higher level than where they are now, close to their peak throughout the rest of the season. I think it's about consistency level at this point. Like you need to show that you can maintain this level of consistency against the Clemsons of the world. Going up against, USC doesn't have the greatest defensive line in the world, but in a big game like that is going to be highly publicized, that is going to be a big game, that's going to be on prime time. Those big moments against the best teams, I think, is what is going to separate this team from being what looks like a good now offensive line to being a very good one. Like I think that those big moments are what the team needs.
I'm going to get a little bit more technical with my answer, Ryan. I think what you said, I'm on board with everything you just said. I think number one, I already talked about part of it. Joe Alt, Jarrett Patterson, just keep doing what you're doing, right? Which is really good. Josh Lugg, the last 2 games have probably been the most consistent that Josh Lugg has played. Not dominant. He's just not a dominant guy right now. I don't know if it's the back injury or whatever. He just doesn't move people. He's been pretty good in pass pro the last 2 weeks. He's been doing his job in the run game. Just keep doing that, right? Just being steady. Not all 5 guys have to be dominant players, right? Sam Mustipher in 2017, as part of that Joe Moore award-winning line, was not a dominant player. But you know what Sam was in 2017? About as steady as you were going to see as a center. Right? Just did his job, play after play, no big mistakes, just do your job, right? So those 3 guys just keep doing what you're doing. The personnel-wise, it's about Zeke continuing to ascend and building on what he's done in the last 2 games, which has been really good. And it's about Blake Fisher starting to get closer and closer to his full potential as being a dominant player.
Yep.
And if those 2 things happen personnel-wise, it gives you a chance. Then the other thing, too, is I just need to see a little bit more fire off the ball, and I don't mean fires in like passion, but I mean like literally firing off the ball with a little bit more force. It's probably a better way of saying it. I still think there's a few too many times you see the line where they kind of step off and they just kind of place their hands. And I think that's the next area for Coach Eastan. He's done a great job of getting a group of linemen who just did not move their feet in the first 2 games or all of the last 2 years, really last year, really. But 2 of the previous 3 years, the year where Chris Watt was there, they've done a much better job of getting them to move their feet. They're starting to kind of, get more of a foot push, but they're not everyone is doing enough really driving their hands into contact. Joe Alt's got to get better about this, for example. And he's got to be more consistent. Josh Lugg's got to be better with this. Jarrett Patterson, to a degree, has got to be better at this. The guy that I think has done the best job of this so far is probably Zeke. Zeke's the guy that, to me, plays with the most violent hands of the offensive line. And I think at times that kind of hurt him early because he was maybe at times getting maybe a little bit too aggressive, right? But Zeke does a good job with that. But these guys need to use their hips and their hands more to arrive with violence. And I'm not talking about like coming off and being out of control. Just when you strike, when you're going to engage, just really come with a punch, right? We're not seeing enough of that. I think that'll help with movement. Because what they're doing, Ryan, is they're getting to the right spots, and then they're just so big and they're strong that they're able to then move people. I want to see more initial movement, and that's going to come by playing a little bit more force. That's what the 2020 line did. That's what the 2017 line did. That's what the 2015 line did. The best lines they've had are teams where they really play with violence. They're not playing with a lot of violence right now with their hands, and that's an area that I think they've gotten better, but they need to get a lot better at, and that can be fixed in season. And then the other thing too, and that leads to a bit more of a push. The other thing too is I think they can still stand to get better at the timing of getting off combo blocks. It's gotten a lot better since the first 2 games, a lot better. But that's a specific area that I think still could stand to get a little bit better. And sometimes it's, and more often than not, right, it's getting off too early.
Yeah,
I think has been the issue. Not too late. It's getting off too early. Like, hey, dude, if you'd have just stayed for one more split second, Zeke overtakes that guy and you're rolling off and there's a big hole there. Mm-hmm. So I think they've been a little bit impatient getting off combos, and now they've gotten better each week, but I think that's the final step. I think those 3 things, the improvement from Zeke and Blake, just continue to get better, playing with more violence at the point of attack, and then just the timing of the combo blocks, because that's an important part of what they're going to do, especially if they stick with the zones. And the zones and counter are the 2 best runs they've had all year.
Yep.
Those both require great double teams at the point of attack. And duo is literally built around double teams, Ryan. I mean, the whole concept of duo is double teams, correct? I mean, that's what you're trying to do. It's
called duo.
Right? So those things, if the timing of those things gets better, I think that's going to make this run game a lot better, which then makes the offensive line a lot better. And their pass pro the last really 2.5 games has been, borderline excellent. Yep. It's been really good. So just keep doing what you're doing there. It's the run game where I think they can and should make more improvements. Does that sound fair to you? Kind of on same page there on that.
Absolutely.
Michael S. with a couple of super chats. Thank you, Michael. How does Stanford's offense and defense compare to BYU? What's the same? What's different? Who is better on each side of the ball? Well, BYU is definitely the better offense. Mm-hmm. I think they have a little bit more speed. Stanford has more size. BYU is more balanced. BYU is not a great rushing team, Ryan, but they're definitely better than Stanford. Mm-hmm. And I would argue if BYU's offensive line coach had Stanford's players,
they'd be the best pass blocking offensive line in the country.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing BYU does really well, man, is they are a really, really good pass blocking offensive
which
line.
Says a lot about the pressures that Notre Dame was able to get against them last week.
Yep.
So that would be, offensively, I think that's a comparison. I mean, they're not too far off schematically, honestly. No. Because, again, David Shaw's a West Coast guy. Who was the master of the West Coast offense? Everybody gives a lot of credit to Bill Walsh, but you know who else was one of the masters, the 2 grand wizards of the West Coast offense? Lavelle Edwards, BYU guy, right? And so a lot of the West Coast stuff, especially the collegiate level, comes from what Lavelle Edwards was bringing to the table. So schematically, I don't think they're a whole lot different. They're at least from the same family of plays. Defensively, BYU's definitely the better football team defensively.
Easily.
Better secondary by far. Now, Stanford, of all the players, Stanford has the best player of all of them, and that's the corner. If he's healthy, he's the best player. BYU is bigger and more physical up front. They are more athletic at linebacker. They're more rangy at safety, longer at safety, and they're better at the second cornerback position. in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of Blue Kelly, I don't know if there's many guys on the Stanford defense that I would take and start at BYU. I don't just, which is insane to say that. And that's no disrespect to BYU, but when I say insane, 20 years ago, that would have made perfect sense. Perfect sense. Yeah. The narrative changed at the end of the Jim Harbaugh era, and then really, especially in the beginning of the David Shaw era, where in the front seven, Stanford was just, I mean, they had guys that everybody would have wanted. Bama would have wanted some of the guys they had. Bama would have loved to have had Trent Murphy playing outside linebacker for them back then. He was a dude. Sure, you know, they would have loved to. Every team would have wanted Solomon Thomas coming out of college. I mean, everybody. There were some dudes playing on the front seven first. I mean, Shane Scobb,
Thomas, yeah.
You know, AJ Tarpley, Blake Martinez. And those are NFL dudes. You know, Blake Martinez.
Shane Scobb was a monster.
Oh,
he was a monster.
So, and then they had legit NFL players in the second level.
Yep.
And it's just gone. It's just gone. It's not all the football program's fault. School plays a big role in that. They have not evolved with the times as an institution, and there's not a lot the football team can do about that. Like the stuff that people complain about for Notre Dame is a real thing at Stanford. Mm-hmm. And then I've said this for years. It's much easier to get into Notre Dame than it is to get into Stanford. It's much harder to get your degree as a football player at Notre Dame than it is at Stanford. That's also a fact. So that would be where we would be on that one. Michael S. also says Stanford's strength, red zone has been Notre Dame's weakness. Is how does Notre Dame change this? Honestly, there's two things. Number one is execute better, but schematically, I think Notre Dame's red zone design this year has not been great. I think partly because they try to design everything. Sometimes it's like you have 87. Question for you, offensive coordinator. This is what I would say to Tommy Rees if he asked my opinion, and he never would. But if he did, here's what I would say. Okay, coach, as we're putting our red zone game plan together, let me ask you a question. Does that team have anyone that can cover 87 one-on-one? Okay, no? All right, cool. Then it's okay to just call a play to say, hey, that dude's better than the other dude. It's okay to do that. And not everything has to be a perfectly designed play where you do this and you show your brilliance. We all know you're super brilliant. We all know you're really smart. Sometimes, though, it's okay. It's okay as a coach to sometimes say, my dudes are better than your dudes. And when it comes to the red zone, Notre Dame has yet to play a team, Ohio State, Marshall, Cal, BYU, North Carolina, and I don't see one coming up that has a defensive player, including Clemson. I love Trenton Simpson as a player. You give me him in a one-on-one on the end of the boundary all by himself against Michael Mayer. I like that matchup at the 7-yard line. I just do. And so I think that's part of it too, is just use your dudes, right? And then sometimes be a little smarter with how you use your box. You know, get a tight box to then maybe set up a pass play, but then don't try to run inside zone out of 11 personnel out of width when you are not using a receiver to block the backside because you're going to get outnumbered. So I think it's about being smart in those instances as well. Let's get down here. We've got some more questions here from everybody. Do these as quickly as possible. John A1 says, who had the more impressive season so far from an assistant coach? Harry Hiestand, Deland McCullough, Mike Mickens, or Al Washington? It's Mike Mickens easily for me. And, you know, Deland McCullough's done a really nice job. I think the backs not being more productive in the first two games is more about the line and the usage, but he's done a really nice job. But the backs were already in a pretty good position. I think that you know, that there's talent there. They were coached relatively well by Lance Taylor. Coach McCullough's taken it to another level. I think he's done a really good job. I think Al Washington's done an okay job. He's not in the conversation for me. I think the D-line's been too inconsistent for me to have Al Washington as part of this conversation. I just can't have him as part of the conversation. I think if you take out the first two games, Harry Hiestand is definitely in this conversation. But to me, the first two games happened. And whether you want to blame the previous O-line coach or whatever the case may be, the fact is the offensive line did not play well the first two games. And I guarantee you Harry Hiestand would be the first one to say that's on me, not Jeff Quinn or Tommy Rees. That's just, I think, who Harry Hiestand is. So he's got to do a better job there, in my opinion. But with Mike Mickens, I mean, he has, to me, done a masterful job with what he's done this year. And he's done so with his best player injured and not playing well. And I think he's not playing well because of the injury. I think this can happen in football, Ryan. Guys can develop bad habits as they're playing through an injury, and that's the big danger, especially skill players. That's the big danger when it comes to playing skill guys that have injuries, lower body injuries, because they will even oftentimes subconsciously start doing things because there's a lack of confidence in that lower body, an ankle, the hamstring, whatever. So you saw Cam Hart get real grabby in the first couple games.
Yep.
Right. And doing things, you're like, that's the guy that's not playing with a lot of confidence in himself. Now, we said coming out of the break that I really wanted to see Cam Hart be better because you had time to rest. He looked a lot quicker and twitchier against North Carolina. And lo and behold, against a pretty good receiving core, do you remember Cam Hart's name being called on Saturday against BYU?
No.
Other than coming up a couple times and blowing up the screen game and the perimeter stuff, I don't remember it being called. And then when you watch the All-22, you're like, oh, okay, they ignored Cam Hart's side of the field, and for good reason. And like, okay, that's the Cam Hart that we thought we were going to see. Now, was that just a really good game, or is that the beginning of what's to happen?
We'll see.
If that's true, this is going to be a really good situation. So the job Mike Mickens has done, to me, of the assistant coaches is by far the best we've seen. And that's saying something because I think Brian Mason's done a really good job. I think that Harry Heastand, the growth we've seen from that group in a short period of time is impressive. Dylan McCullough's done a really good job. Mm-hmm. I think there's no doubt. I think the two front seven coaches have got to do a better job. That's Al Golden / James Laurinaitis and then Al Washington. Those units have been way too inconsistent, and they were supposed to be strengths this year of the defense.
Yep.
And if they can become that again, Ryan, then this team's going to be really dangerous. Really.
I do like to shout out to Dylan McCullough, though, man. He has done a tremendous job. Because before the season, Brian, we were talking about it, right? A lot of talent in that running back room, but not a lot of proven guys, right? Like not a lot of proven production. I mean, during the last 3 games, they have been the real spark that this offense needed, right? Being creative with them in the passing game, being what they are as runners. I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about a ton is Audric Estime has been pretty excellent as a pass blocker too, man. He's done a really good job in that department. So hats off to Coach McCullough. He's done a really good job, especially in the last few games, of really getting that running back unit turned from potential into game day production, which has been fantastic to see.
He has. Irish-blooded with he says, I want to see more RPOs. I want to see Tobias on a wheel route, go route. I want to see Styles down the field. I want to see Estime just punish the Stanford linebackers. Well, the last thing I think we're going to see.
Yes.
But the first one, we'll have to see. We'll have to see about the first few. Yes. Now, again, in Coach Reese's defense, I probably would not have run a ton of RPOs early on with Drew Pine. Because receivers were not playing very well and like inconsistent. Like, again, do you really want to run an RPO when you just lost a game where one of your receivers just got flat outplayed by the football, where teams are squatting on your routes because you can't protect long enough to throw the ball down the field? That's not great RPO territory. And now you're starting a new quarterback for the first time against a pretty darn good defense. And now you're going on the road against a really high octane North Carolina team. Am I asking Drew Pine to make a lot of those type of reads? I'm not. I'm actually okay with that. They ran some RPOs against BYU. There was one of his early completions, that little slide route to Michael Mayer, that was off RPO. There was a couple other times I thought they could have gone to it, should have gone to it. I think now you need to ramp up the RPO stuff, especially with how bad your slot receivers are at blocking right now. And so, like, okay, if they can't block, then like the hard crash, remember that linebacker crashed? That should be an automatic pull and throw it, because he was showing that before the snap. Yep. Drew sees that, catch, bam, throw a little now screen outside, and you've got 7-8 yards easy, as opposed to a 3-yard loss. So the first one definitely now is something that I want to see. And I think I've never been okay not playing Tobias. That's always been a thing, right there with you. The RPO thing is one where I am going to defend Coach Reese's lack of usage of RPOs the last few games because of the circumstances. But now it's time. With Drew got 3 starts under his belt, he's playing very good football. Now is the time to get RPOs back into your offense, in my opinion. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been now, especially now that the run game's working too, Brian. Right, you have the run game working. Your quarterback is becoming more confident. That's where that starts coming out now, man. Where he's starting to feel a lot more comfortable in his own skin, talking about Drew Pine. And the run game's going. I mean, play action game, RPO game, both those things should be working at this point.
Yep, absolutely. Next one, John A1 says, I'll let you answer this, Ryan. Will this be the game where Braden Lindsey breaks out with at least 2 big plays?
John, I'm at the point here, man, where I'm not predicting any Braden Lindsey breakouts anymore, man. I'm just not doing it. It's been like 17 years. So I'm
Yep.
just gonna let it happen if it happens, man. Do I want it to happen? Of course.
Yeah.
I think that Braden Lindsey's style in this offense is needed, right? Like, I think that it is a big aspect that is missing on a consistent basis, right? So I hope it happens, but I can't predict it anymore, man. I just can't. Like, I've just been waiting on it for too long. This is the team that it probably could happen, right? I mean, we talked about the secondary not being great without their best corner. It's possible, but again, just can't predict it at this point. I'll be surprised, and it's surprised in a good way if and when it happens.
My answer was hope so.
That's it. Same. Looking forward to it if it happens.
Yeah, hope so, but we'll see.
Can you imagine how happy we would be after in a post-game show if they hit like a couple like 50-plus yarders to Braden Lindsey for touchdowns? Like, finally. That'd be really
nice. It'd be really nice. Archer 452, resident Ohio State fan. CBS Sports put out their updated bowl projections and have Notre Dame versus Florida in the Gator Bowl. CBS Sports did also. One of the ESPN bowl projection guys also had that matchup. Florida, Notre Dame versus Florida in the Gator Bowl. I would like that matchup for Notre Dame based on where they are right now. Yeah, I would. I think Florida have a really hard time scoring on Notre Dame. Very hard time scoring on Notre Dame.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind the matchup on field, and then also the kind of the energy around the game too, right? I mean, Florida still has a big brand. They're still a national recognized game, and I think that if that's where you're ending the season off after what it started out with, and if you're able to get a win in the Gator Bowl, like that would be a nice little stopping point, like potentially build upon, because Florida is still a national brand, obviously.
Absolutely. Well, and you're also trying to recruit the state of Florida more, in a big, and that's not a New Year's Six bowl game, but it's a big bowl game. I believe it's a New Year's first bowl game. It's not one of the New Year's Six games. That would be a big win. There's no doubt about that. No doubt. And I like I said, I like the matchup. Timeout Tom says, are we actually going to see Bertrand and Maris Lufau, or JD Bertrand and Maris Lufau at linebacker this week? The coaches have to admit they've been less than adequate. I'd like to see Tua Alamaka get meaningful time. Yes, they're both going to play. They should play. Even if they get benched as starters, they would still both play as part of a rotation. Do I think Prince Kollie in limited time has outplayed Maris Lufau and deserves more reps? I do.
Yeah.
Would I even be willing to start Prince Kollie over Maris Lufau right now? Yeah, I would. I would.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And one of two things is going to happen. Prince is going to play better than Marist, or the light goes on for Marist, and he gets rolling. But he just has not played, and he doesn't have the track record. Like JD Bertrand, I'm going to give a longer leash to than Marist, because JD has a track record. Like, we know JD can be better. And he was solid against BYU. He was great. He was solid against BYU. So I'm giving him a little bit of a longer leash than Maris at this point in time, Ryan, because he had 100 tackles last year. I mean, the kid can play. He just isn't playing well right now.
Bertrand was not nearly as bad against BYU as people acted like he was. Right. I think comfortably Maris was the worst linebacker against BYU on the team. Like, I don't think it's particularly close, if I'm being honest. Like, he was not good against BYU, man. And again, coming from a guy that has been a big Maris Lufau supporter throughout, the summer going into the season, just not playing well right now, man. But I mean, to your point, he still needs to play, because there is one thing about Maris is the fact that, like, hey, at some point the light needs to come on, but he still hasn't played a ton of football at Notre Dame, right? Like, there's still some inexperience from a playing time perspective. So I'm still willing to work with him, still willing to give him opportunities. But yes, Prince Kollie needs to play. Like, he needs to play.
Yes.
I want to see
Tua
Tagovailoa get. Yes,
he's earned it by what we've seen from him on Saturdays. Not he was a top 100 recruit. He's been good on special teams. We think he can be good. It's a different argument for Prince than it is for Tobias. Mm-hmm. With Tobias, it's us projecting what he thinks he can earn. And I'm not backing off at all from what I say about Tobias. I'm just saying this is different than arguing play Jalen Sneed more.
Right.
Because that's just about what he was in high school. And I'm okay if you want to make that argument. I mean, he was a heck of a player. He should be in the rotation somehow.
But it's a stronger argument for a guy that's literally done it on Saturday.
Yes, and that's the point. That's the point. And I think that's why I think he has earned the right to play. And Al Golden had some comments yesterday in the press conference that make us think, it would not shock me if we do see a lot more of Prince this week. And he said, one of the things he said was basically that Prince has had a really good week of practice so far. Well, again, Monday, Tuesday, it's 2 days. But that's what playing a kid will do. Imagine that. You finally give a kid some burn, and he's like, I'm motivated to go earn more. Because it can get frustrating when you think you're busting your hump, and you're not getting those opportunities. Mm-hmm. Then when you get it, you're like, okay, I want more. It's like you ever like the first time you like as an adult, first time you taste something you've never had before, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is glorious. I just want more of it. That's what playing time is for a young football player. I'm just telling you that right now. Like the first time you get in the field, like, okay, I love this. Like I want more. What do I got to do? Practice my butt off? Word. Got it. You know what I mean? It can be inspiring to a young player. And that's why I think those opportunities needed to be had. Prince needed it. And then once he got it, he did what he needed to do. So yeah, he needs to play more. Timeout Tom also, is Howard Cross back this week, or are they giving him another week to heal? Hopefully Rubio gets more experience. My understanding is Howard is going to play this week. It has not been officially stated. I do not believe Marcus Freeman said he would definitely be back, but it sounded like he would play from the Monday press conference. And we'll find out more about that injury and other injuries on Thursday. Ed asks, are slow starts in the first and third quarters an indictment of the planning and adjustments of the offensive coaching staff? I don't know if it's an indictment. I mean, that's a really strong term.
It's something that needs to improve.
It's a criticism, sure. And maybe that's what Ed means by indictment. I mean, that could be what he means. But to me, it's that. It's not just the game planning, though. Mm-hmm. And the adjustments to a degree, I still don't think this offense plays with enough of a sense of urgency. And it's the same thing with the scan stuff. Like, I am not doing the scan stuff on the script. I'm not, except like a play here, a play there. I'm coming out and I'm going tempo. I'm going to make you show me what you're going to show me. I'm going to make you declare this is how you go. I'm going to push a little bit more tempo early to get this offense rolling. Then you go to the scan stuff. I have no problem with the scan stuff. If I was coaching now, I would do that. Most teams do. But you can overdo it. And I think right now Notre Dame is overdoing it, and it takes away some of the tempo, and it's something that you do when you think I always have to be in the perfect play. Sometimes I don't give a crap about the perfect play, right? So I said when you had to step out, we're talking about like getting better in the red zone. What are the problems? Well, one of it is sometimes because you're always trying to draw up a scheme to work. And sometimes, like I said, this is what I said. I'd sit down with Kyle Maurice and I'd say this. Does that team have anybody that can stop Michael Mayer inside the 10-yard line? No? Then it's okay for you not to have to out-scheme everybody. Okay? Yeah. Sometimes it's okay. Put 87 out to the field and say, throw the ball up to him, Drew. He either catches it or nobody does, because that guy can't guard him. Stanford did that for a decade. I mean, for a decade, Stanford. And they're still doing it. It's just they don't have Michael Mayer anymore at tight end. They used to, all the time, have guys like him. You know, Kobe Fleener. I mean, they would just, okay, just you don't have a dude that can cover Kobe Fleener. You don't have to do that can cover Zach Ertz. You don't have a dude that can cover Caden Smith, so we're just going to throw it up to him. You know, and it's okay to do that sometimes. It doesn't mean you're not smart and brilliant. It just means sometimes the smart and brilliant move is to say, my dude's better than your dude, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say is it's very smart to throw Michael Mayer the football. So
right. But you know what I mean by smart? It's like sometimes, well, look at this great scheme and this creative. Really creative. Yes, creative. Yeah. Correct. So some people said, like, why do some coaches get so obsessed with passing the football? Because nobody looks at a coach whose team runs for 350 yards like, wow, what a genius play caller that guy is. Yeah. Oh, that guy's just got better dudes. Usually you show your genius by your pass concepts. And sometimes it's like, dude, I don't need to be smart.
It's so backwards, man. Because I could watch Chip Kelly's running scheme all day long, man. Like, incredible stuff. But yeah.
Absolutely. Tommy Gunn says, Harry's guys have probably improved the most since week 1, but overall the best position group for the entirety of the season so far to say is the DB group. And I think Tommy nails it. And that's why I went with Mike Mickens as the best assistant coach so far. It's because the secondary's been good throughout. And they've played teams, like we talked about how good the offenses are. They've played teams that are really good at throwing the football. Yeah. I mean, C.J. Stroud has looked like the best quarterback in the country since the Notre Dame game. They made him work for stuff in that game, man.
And including Drake May. I know he's only a redshirt freshman, Brian, but like you can make an argument that's 2 top 5 quarterbacks in college football right now. Like you can make that argument.
I would argue they've played 3 top 10 quarterbacks so far. At least 3 top 15 quarterbacks. Is that at least – can we at least agree to that Hall? For sure? Yeah. I'd have to think about whether Jaron's in the top 10. I mean, I probably wouldn't put him in it. I think top 15, I feel a lot more comfortable with putting Jaron Hall in that one, especially the way he's played this year. So, and you shut him down. I mean, he literally had the worst game of his career against you.
For like 120 yards.
Yes,
and
9 completions.
busted coverage.
53 of them were on a busted coverage. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now you got to stop busting those coverages. That's right. I mean, that's the thing. It's like it's not an excuse. Stop doing that.
You are 3 plays away from holding him to less than 100 yards and Drake May to what, 180, 190?
I mean, let's play this game against CJ Stroud as well.
Yeah.
Because CJ Stroud passed for, what was it, 223 yards against Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
He had 2 big plays in that game. He had 2 plays that went for about 70, 80 yards combined. I mean, they were making him have to make brilliant on-the-run throws on the sideline for 11-yard gains. I mean, the pass defense was really good that game. And now CJ showed why he's a great player. Because great players are not guys that always throw for 500 yards. Great players are sometimes guys that make plays when it's not easy sledding for them. And when the other team is talented and the other team is doing a good job and you are missing your best receiver and all that stuff, hey, what do you do when the game's on the line? CJ did not play great against Notre Dame. But you know what he did? When he needed him to make plays, he made them. And that's what great players do. And that's why I've said, I think right now I'd say CJ Stroud's the best player in the country right now, in my opinion, at least on offense. He's the best offensive player in the country, in my opinion, right now. Greg Lisman Jr., I think he just needed to get some of the old cobwebs from the previous O-line and establish the he stand mentality, which has certainly paid dividends. And I think you're right, Greg. And this is something we talked about in the offseason is not that we predicted it, but we questioned how long would it take for that to get worked out. And I think he's right. There were some bad habits that he had to get out. I wish you would have got him out sooner. You needed him to get out sooner because you played Ohio State in the opener. But I think that's been the thing, Ryan, is it's just as he's gotten them to play more of the game the way he wants it played, the better this football team has been.
I think he had to break some bad habits early, and players need to experience a little bit of success, man. Like last year, it was tough sledding, literally, as an offensive line, right? And then I feel like as soon as the offensive line has gotten some taste of success, that it's starting to really blossom confidence. That's how I take it anyway. I mean, hopefully it continues. With Harry Heason's track record and the talent that Notre Dame has up front, I have a hard time thinking it's going to revert. It's going to have the downslide, but we have to monitor just how much they are improving on a week-to-week basis because it's still a question mark until it's not anymore.
Absolutely. Let's get to some more. We're going to try to rock through these because we've got to get rolling here. Let's see here. Wade Garrett says, I think the defensive line is completely underperformed all season except against Ohio State. They make a good play sometimes, but overall it's disappointing, especially considering the hype. I'm going to strongly disagree with this one.
Yes.
Has the defensive line been brilliant? No. Has the defensive line taken over basically the last 3 games at times? Yes, especially the first 2 of this stretch. They were dominant against North Carolina. They were dominant against Cal, in my opinion, after the first quarter and a half. Do they need to get better? Yeah, they got to get better. They got to play better, especially against the run. We talked about that. They're getting pushed around a little bit too much on the inside. But there have been times this year where the defensive line is taking games over, Ryan. So
I also don't think the defensive line played incredibly well against
that. Was one of the worst games that they had, in my opinion. I didn't think they played well at all in that game.
I think I don't know. I didn't really think they made that much of an impact in that game, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, like you're playing against good players, right? So sure. But yeah, I didn't think that they I didn't think they had a huge impact in that game. I thought Riley Mills had a solid game against Ohio State. I thought Isaiah Foskey had a below average game for his standards. And the interior defensive line was Howard Cross had a decent game.
Yeah. I was going to say Howard played well that game. I thought Jacob Lacey had a solid game in limited snaps. I think their 2 least effective players in that game were Jason Adamiola and Isaiah Foskey. And now they've both broke out. That was the criticism we had. Neither one of those guys were really that good the first 2 games. They've broken out and they've played a lot better.
Yep.
Greg Lisman also says this game must be a 3-touchdown win, no excuses. The only excuse that I would say, Greg, is if you're up by 24 and they score a touchdown with a minute and a half on your backup defense. But to your point, Greg, I think Greg nails it. This needs to, if this team is progressing, Ryan, this game won't be close. Whether that's 17, 19, 20, 21, or 40, I don't know the answer to that, but it needs to be a game where I would say maybe I would tweak it. So I wouldn't say 3-touchdown game because I think you can win by 3 touchdowns and not necessarily play great. This needs to be a game where for 60 minutes you dominated and were clearly the best team on the field. If you do that, then the 3-4 touchdown takes care of itself. But I would rather do that. Like against they beat Wisconsin last year by 4 touchdowns. They didn't play like a team that was 4 touchdowns better than Wisconsin.
No.
So it's more about then that's the difference between process driven and results driven, right? The process is what matters, and it will lead to the results. Yakov 22. I'm an Ohio State fan that only recently discovered your channel. You guys are both interesting and informative. Thank you very much for that. And he's got a, I think the avatar he has is the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. I think so. I think he will really like our channel this summer when we get into our history Q&As during our mailbag day. So yeah, like that. Mark Brown, considering Stanford's porous run defense is the play action pass a backbreaker against them. If Notre Dame gets estimate Tyree going early, even marginally.
Yeah. 100%. Yep. RPO game, play action game. It could be huge in this football game with how Notre Dame's running the football. If they establish something early, absolutely, Mark. I think it could be huge in this game.
Yep, absolutely. We had a super chat here from TJ Fallon I want to get to here real quick. TJ says, what do you guys think of how Nana and Gabriel Rubio have been playing? I think Nana's been really – I thought BYU was probably his worst game.
Yeah.
But what did he do on the last play? He was in there.
Made a play.
Big time, right? When the game was on the line, he made a big play. That's what you want to see, right? But I thought it was his most I won't say worst. I think that's too strong. It was his most inconsistent game.
Yeah.
But I think Nana has been asked to do one thing. When you're in the game, set the edge. He's been pretty good at it so far, I feel like, Brian.
He's actually been better than I thought he was going to be coming into the season, if I'm being honest. I think Nana's played his role well. I mean, to your point, right? There was inconsistency against against BYU last week, setting the edge and doing all that type of stuff, but made a big play when it mattered. Will help to make a big play when it mattered. And I think Gabriel Rubio, Brian, has showed a lot of good stuff, man. Like
he's just had some glaringly bad plays.
Yes.
But overall, he's been pretty solid.
Against North Carolina, man, I thought he was good. Like in his snaps that he had against North Carolina, I thought he was a good player in increased snaps. This past week, I mean, that touchdown run that they had, like that was just an easy play to look at and be like, Gabriel got destroyed on that play, right? Like that was a bad play. But I think there's been more good than bad so far.
And would you say this, Ryan? That play was one where there's a lot of teaching that you can do off that play.
Oh, 100%.
It wasn't like he just got dominated because he's not good. This is what happens when you don't move your feet. Because I guarantee that's happened in practice. And it's going to be, and this is what Gabriel, this is what happens when you do what I told you not to do and you stop moving your feet, right? Like, and he knows, oh yeah, you're right, coach. You're right. I got you. You know,
against his experienced offensive line. I mean, the BYU you saw the difference.
Exactly.
Right? Like it may not have hurt him against Cal's offensive line or North Carolina's offenve lines, but against a better one, Gabriel, we need to do this better.
Right. Absolutely. Ben Tarnowski says, where do y'all think Notre Dame's program would be today if the coaches had decided to replace Book with Phil or if Phil had stayed? I'm going to just answer this one quickly.
Yeah.
I think it was the move that should have been made. My thing that I've always said is I don't know if Tommy Rees would have known how to use Phil Dracovic. Now, I think Chip Long would have done a better job using him, and I wish that he would have done that in 2019. But I think if Phil would have taken over and been the quarterback that I think that he can be, and he is almost every time he gets a relatively clean pocket, he's been really good. And you saw that early against Clemson. He was pretty good early against Clemson, and then the D-line took over, and then terrible, right? That was an offensive line problem. If Phil was the guy that I thought he would be, we'd be in the same position we are right now. Brian Kelly would have used it to springboard to another job. The team would have been really good last year, maybe even better than they were last year, Phil. But he'd be gone because he wouldn't be here as a fifth-year senior. He would have started half the 19 season. He'd have taken over in 2020, and he'd been really good on that team, with the running ability they had and throw the ball down the field and all that. Would have been really good on that team. And then, last year would have been his last year, and he'd have been gone. So you'd be in the same place where you are now, in my opinion. But you would have been better the last 2 years, though, in my view. Assuming Tommy Rees knew how to use Phil Dracovic, which in 2020, that game plan they used the book for would have been perfect for Phil Dracovic. So anyway, Jay Montalbano, who do you guys think is the MVP of the defense so far? To me, it's easy. That's an easy answer. Tariq Bracy, yeah. Easy answer. And Howard Cross is my runner-up so far. Because just steadiness, steadiness has been,
Yeah.
David Lowe, y'all guys see Drew Pine starting next year. David, I'm going to give you the same answer that we gave earlier in the week. It's a very fair question, David. This is not a criticism of your question. It's just I got to see more, right? Like he hasn't played a good defense yet. Well, he has. He played one, and he was bad. It was against Cal. I don't think it was because of Cal. I think he was just jittery in a conservative game plan. I don't think that but I need to see him play against Clemson. I need to see him play against Syracuse. I need to see him play against USC before I'm ready to say he'll start. But I will say this. As long as he doesn't collapse, he has absolutely earned the right for this to be a full-blown quarterback competition in the offseason.
100%.
There's no doubt. But should he be considered the leader in the clubhouse? Let me see how the season plays out first. Beefeater says, most important question in the history of Irish Breakdown ever. Would you rather have a staring contest with David Shaw or listen to Lincoln Riley whine for 10 minutes? I would rather listen to Lincoln Riley whine for 10 minutes because A, it would be funny, and B, there's no way I'm beating David Shaw in a staring contest.
What do I get if I beat him in a staring contest? That
it's
would
not
be
happening.
My question.
I don't even need to think of it because it's not happening. Have you seen first of all, David Shaw never changes his facial expression ever.
He doesn't.
Which is funny. I was talking with Sean about this. We were some people on the chat and the board like, oh, David Shaw just seems disinterested. And I was like, it is hilarious how winning or losing changes people's perception of how you act on the sideline. And I'm like, I've watched Stanford play 3 times this year, and David Shaw's sideline body language is the same as it was when they were going to winning Rose Bowls. He has no emotion. But now it's because he doesn't care. Then it was, he's so calm and poised and smart, and now he's disinterested. I'm like, no, he's the same dude, mannerism-wise on the sideline he's always been, in my opinion.
I know I mean, you can say the same thing about Bill Belichick. Is Bill Belichick disinterested? Right. I mean, quarterback-wise, is Peyton Manning disinterested because he just keeps the same demeanor all the time? Like, that's just
right. Exactly. But yeah, so that I find that a funny statement. Most important IB question ever, number 2. Would you rather go khaki shopping with Jim Harbaugh or apply Ryan Day's beard hair dye? I would rather go, yes, that is the second one is weird. Yeah, the first one is, okay, I need a pair of khakis too. If I got to listen to some weird stories from Jim Harbaugh for a little bit, then okay, cool. But yeah, that's and we're not going to read the next 3 that Beefeater put out. So I feel like there's a game I used to play with my friend Cam Watley back in the day, where he would come up with these would you rather things. And
would you rather?
This is like hard pass. David Lowe, can y'all imagine a future with Carr throwing to Ryan Wingo? It'd be nice. It'd be nice. Mark Brown, 2 areas needing most improvement: run defense and wide receiver involvement. I will agree with Mark, but I also need to commend him on the manner in which he said the second one. Mm-hmm. Not wide receiver play, which does need to get better, but I think it has.
Yeah.
I read this as Mark acknowledging that the receivers are playing better, but they're not being used enough.
Emphasized.
Right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And maybe certain guys. So, Mark, I commend you on the manner in which you asked this question. I think that was a great way of phrasing that. And I would say, yeah, those are probably, I would say the 2 biggest areas for improvement are actually both on defense right now. And that's run defense and big plays. Because I still think you can be a pretty decent team if your receivers aren't being used a ton. I would put receiver involvement 3rd, a very close 3rd to big plays. Actually, no, I'd put big plays first. I would put big plays first because I can still scheme ways to shut down the run, and they've had some good games against the run. I think the big plays is first. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. I guess we're going to read one more. Would you rather, number 5, have to call a game with Jason Garrett or be Preston Guy's special guest on Tiger Bait? I've already done the latter. The reason I would go with the first one is I would rather talk with someone who actually knows football.
Oh,
so that's why I'm going with the first one. So that's definitely my
Well, I've never been on with Preston, so I would love to go with Preston over Jason Garrett.
No hard pass. Jay Montalbano, Brian, we win Saturday if Notre Dame plays their game. I mean, that's it. That's really it. Play your game. Do what you've been doing. Keep building. Play your game, and you win. The degree to how well they play their game, Ryan, will be the determiner of the outcome. If Notre Dame plays their best game and Stanford plays their best game, Notre Dame is a 2-touchdown better team than Stanford at least. Mm-hmm. At least. And, of course, those 2 things can't happen at the same time or rarely.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer. Just play your game. Run the ball, be efficient in the pass game, shut down the run, just be the best team, best version of yourself. And that's what I think you need to be. So anyway, everybody, that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I am looking forward to kind of seeing what we need to blow out Stanford. D-Rock, you are correct. And hopefully that's what we will see. Tonight, 6 o'clock, the IB Nation Sports Talk mailbag with Vince and Sean will be tonight. Tomorrow, Ryan and I will be back to talk about the keys to victory for NotreAme. And, of course, tomorrow night also will be the final episode of the week for IB Nation Sports Talk. Friday, Ryan and I will do our predictions, and we're going to interview there's so many great games this weekend, Ryan. I love the schedule of games. Like, I'm so glad it's a night game because there's just going to be some. Well, I mean, I guess we're going to be a little busier than I thought, on Saturday. But there's going to be a lot of games. They're going to be getting DVR'd at the Driscoll household. They're going to get played on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. Just a great weekend of college football. This is going to be shake-up Saturday. Some teams' playoff hopes are going to get dashed this weekend, and some teams are going to build some really strong playoff resumes based on what happens this weekend. Big Ten, Pac-12, SEC, huge games this weekend. I can't wait to see it. It's Big 12 also. Big 12 now has back-to-back huge weeks. Oklahoma State TCU is going to be a huge game this weekend. So I can't wait. Ryan and I are going to break all of it down. We're going to have about 5 or 6 games we specialize in, but, man, we're going to talk about it a lot. So expect our Notre Dame prediction show to be a lot shorter on Friday, and our college football talk to be a lot longer. Saturday morning, 10 a.m., Vince and Sean will be back with IB Countdown to Kickoff. We'll preview the Notre Dame game and talk about some of those big games as well. And, of course, we'll have our post-game show. It's going to be a late post-game show this week because of a 7:30 kickoff, but we will have our post-game show nonetheless. So be ready for that as well. So, as always, everybody, we thank you all. We appreciate you all very, very much. Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check out the website at irishbreakdown.com. And we thank y'all. Saturday, be about 3:30. Stay locked in. We're going to have our special edition show of Irish Breakdown. You're going to want to be there for that. If you're in town and you're at the game, you're going to want to be there for that. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. You all have a great day. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.